Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your archbishop of Banterbury, your evangelist of the imagination, your existential Mr. Rogers, and remember, all these are names that people hung on me. Robert Meyer Burnett. And this is Robservations, the home of the Post-Geek Singularity community and you, imagination connoisseurs. And it is episode number 816. My God! On the march to 50,000 subscribers and, I don't know, 1,000 shows. There's been more than 1,000 shows if you include everything here. But in terms of Robservations, so, I don't know, like, subscribe, whatever. I never really say that, but I want to get to those 50,000 subscribers. Who wouldn't? I've been grinding. I've been grinding for a long time. If I did shorter videos, I could get there quicker, but you know me. I like to be loquacious. I do want to point out for you physical media lovers that you can get now from Kino Lorber. You can get The Usual Suspects in 4K, a brand new 16-bit 4K Dolby Vision transfer supervised by Newton Thomas Sigel, the original film's director of photography. Why do I mention that? With all the other physical media, why don't I tell people that, hey, Top Gun Maverick dropped in 4K this week? And indeed it did. I just received my Steelbook. Ooh, what a disc. But the reason that I bring up The Usual Suspects was 21 years ago. It was the first time I was ever hired by a studio personally, myself. Hired by MGM to produce the special features for that disc. And we were very proud of those special features. A lot of great reviews. They've been out of print for 21 years. Out of print. Now, they were finished in standard def, so when you watch them, they're going to be in standard def. I can't help that. That's how we made them 21 years ago. But the content is there. Interviewed a lot of great people, including all the suspects, director Brian Singer, editor and composer John Ottman. It's quite the package. There's an all-new interview with Newton Thomas Sigel that I didn't do, and that's probably in HD. I know it's in HD, and I'm sorry that I didn't get to do anything in HD, but all of our special features are there. Anyway, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. So, you know, all of us, we think a lot about canon. The canon of the stuff that we love. And I think about it a lot. Why is it important? Why do we care? Well, I'll tell you. Let's as a matter of fact, before I move on, I wanted to talk about what is literary canon. What is it? When we talk about canon, what is it? Now, there is something called literary canon. The term literary canon refers to a classification of literature. It is a term used widely to refer to a group of literary works that are considered the most important of a particular time, period, or place. For example, there can be a canon composed of works from a particular country, or works written within a specific set of years, or even a collection of works that were all written during a certain time period and within a certain region. In this way, a literary canon establishes a collection of similar or related literary works. This helps us define ourselves, helps us understand history, the past. What is the Western canon? You know, you think of things like Shakespeare being in the Western canon, and that's important. But in terms of what is canon regarding an IP, what does that mean? exactly? Well, it means basically what is considered the truth within that fictional construct. And here's the thing. I believe personally, I mean, when I say I believe, that means personally. So as a writer, you don't have to say I believe and then say personally. It's just I believe or personally. Actually, personally, I believe. You don't have to say that. It's bad writing. Just say I believe. I believe that all of our fictitious worlds that we love, whether it's Westeros, whether it's Middle-earth, whether it's the United Federation of Planets as depicted in the future of Star Trek, whether it's the galaxy a long time ago, far, far away, pick whatever it is. Pick your favorite role-playing game. Pick your favorite video game, Mass Effect, whatever, Halo. All of these things, all of these fictional universes have a lot of world building going on, and for the most part, they usually come from one person that writes them. There can be multiple people, say, working on games, role-playing games, things like that, video games. But one of the things that's most fun about these fictional universes is the universe itself, the world building that goes on. And there's a lot of time, effort, and probably a lot of imagination spilled to create these worlds. Now, the thing is, within these fictional worlds, take Middle-earth, for example. Everything in Middle-earth was created by one man, Professor J.R.R. Tolkien. It is immutable. Whatever happens in Middle-earth is defined by J.R.R. Tolkien. Anything that is not defined by him, in the case of Lord of the Rings, cannot be necessarily considered canon. Now, he did have his son, Christopher Tolkien, did bring all of his notes together after, posthumously, and put all that out there as well. Now, maybe there is a thought that wouldn't be canonical, but hopefully Christopher did a good job. So most of the things that have been officially published about Lord of the Rings, or that are Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, the Appendices, the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Works, the story of Beren and Luthien, I don't know, whatever. If it's by J.R.R. Tolkien, it's canon. Nothing else is. Nothing. Now there's something like Dune, for instance. To me, Dune canon are the 6 books that Frank Herbert himself wrote. Dune, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics of Dune, and Chapter House Dune. Now, as we all know, Brian Herbert, his son, and Kevin J. Anderson, a familiar name across many different IP circles, continued Dune books. I mean, they wrote the Butlerian Jihad, which is something that was mentioned but extrapolated upon by them. Do I consider Brian Herbert, even though he's the son of Frank Herbert, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson's Dune novels, canon? I do not. They are, let's call them beta canon, but they're not alpha canon. The only canonical Dune books are James, that's a British horror writer, are Frank Herbert's Dune. I didn't say James Herbert earlier, did I? Frank Herbert's original Dune novels. That's it. The 6 books, the 6 Dune books, they're canon. Now, you might be saying to me right now, well, Rob, what does it matter? Who cares? But here's why I think it does matter. Because like anything, those are works of art, literature. Tolkien spent the majority of his life, creating languages. What is it? Quenya and Sindarin? Elvish languages and all kinds of different things. He spent his life writing songs and poems, and they're all of this fictional universe. So it's not just the stories of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. It's the stories of the entirety of Middle-earth, from the first to the third age. All of it. It all came from one man. It's the culmination of one imaginative man's life, human endeavor. And that's important, I think, because, look, in the grand scheme of things, is any of it important if, say, I don't know, a deep impact meteor hits the world and floods everything and destroys all of the existence of humanity on this planet? Probably not. We have bigger fish to fry. But the things that give our lives meaning are surrounding ourselves with the endeavors of other humans and showing what our brief, small lives. a sun burning for billions of years is not going to create the Middle Earth. Not going to do it. Not going to dream it all up, or Dune, or make movies, or make TV shows. A sun can't do it. And you could make an argument that, well, a sun's probably a lot more important than human life. I don't think so. I mean, a sun doesn't dream. A sun just, it heats us, brings life to fruition on planets and all that. So you could say that a sun is probably much more important than anything a human being would do. But I would offer to say, no, au contraire. Human endeavor, human thought, human imagination is what makes our lives unique in the universe. And a celebration, really. And we all know it. And one of the things, I've always believed that in our own small ways, we should all try and give something back to the tapestry of human endeavor. Because it's not just the work of one man. It's the work of all people, all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds. Anybody that's lived, anybody that's put pen to paper, drawn on a wall, made music by banging on rocks, whatever. All of that human endeavor adds to the tapestry of the meaning of our lives here. And I've always thought as fans of things, we should try and give back something, even if it's not great. I mean, now we have the technology to be sharing things of ourselves with everybody around the world. It's pretty great, right? So human endeavor should be respected and honored. And I think the canon of fictitious worlds is also very important because of just how much human imaginative power was brought to bear to create them. And so that's one thing. Now, here's another. Tolkien did not create Middle-earth, I don't think, for monetary gain. I mean, if he did, who cares? He makes money. George R. R. Martin made a shit ton of money on Westeros. He still is today. More power to him. But I don't think George R. R. Martin started writing A Song of Ice and Fire going, and he'd already worked in TV. He'd already been publishing books since the 80s. Books like, by the way, if you want to read a great book about vampires on the Mississippi, read George R. R. Martin's novel Fever Dream. And if you want to read a great superhero book series that's almost 40 years old, delve into the Wild Cards series of books that he created, a shared universe that's very, very interesting with a lot to delve into. Anyway, long story short, I believe in the preservation of canon. Now, here's the thing. What do I mean by that? Well, canon, in my mind, canon is the history and the facts of a fictional universe. Just like we have our own history. For instance, if you were writing a story about World War II, now World War II is a real event, so World War II is part of the canon of our human existence. You can't change it. It was what it was. They didn't have, say, jet planes until the very end of the war, but they didn't do a lot of combat. So if you were to write a story about World War II and you decided to throw jet fighters in there, like Tomcats, F-14 Tomcats, you'd have to make a science fiction movie like 1980's The Final Countdown. But everybody would know it was science fiction and it was not canonical to World War II. It's history. It happened. We know it happened. We have an account. I mean, Tolkien wrote about thousands of years of Middle-earth history. Now, are there sections in it that were left blank? Sure. And I suppose an argument can be made that it's open for interpretation. But who's supposed to interpret it? If it's not J.R.R. Tolkien, I don't think people have the right to do so, especially translating that into another medium. And if the author isn't involved and explicitly states that this is what I wanted, we as fans, if anyone is and you, by the way, you can be a student of a fictitious, history. You can't go see history. History is preserved in all kinds of historical records and books and accounts and all that. Well, what makes a fictitious universe different than history? Now, you can find out more things about history and it might change your opinion, the facts will change your opinion. The great thing about a fictitious universe, especially created by one man who's passed away, or something like Narnia as well, C.S. Lewis, you can't change it. What is there is canon. That's it. You can't change it. There's no changing canon. And anything, if you are a student of J.R.R. Tolkien and you've read everything he's written and you understand everything about Middle-earth, if somebody were to come around and say, write a story about Middle-earth where those people just decided that, well, we can tell you things that weren't written by Tolkien, but they could have happened. My answer to those people is fuck you. First of all, why would you feel that you could do that? But better yet, why would you feel that you should? I mean, I don't really understand why anyone, any creative entity worth their salt would work on any project that was created by somebody and then try and change what is, or change what was there, or even what isn't there, but try and bring themselves into it. Now, here's the thing. If you want to tell a story about Middle-earth, say you wanted to tell a story, I don't know, about somebody that Tolkien didn't write about, a new character, and you wanted to write a story set in Middle-earth, I have no problem with that. However, your story, in order for me as a consumer and a viewer and a fan to enjoy that story, you have to adhere to the canon that has already been established by J.R.R. Tolkien. Otherwise, you're full of shit. You, as a creator, are not doing your job. You're not doing your job because that fictitious world exists. And part of the fun of going back into it is that we all have a shared understanding of who and what existed in that world, what happened in that world. We know the big picture, and we know what the big history is. So I have no problem with anybody writing a story about Middle-earth as long as you take what J.R.R. Tolkien wrote as sacrosanct. You know, it is immutable, unchangeable, and it's not up to you as a creator to go in and tell a story in Middle-earth that does not adhere to what Professor Tolkien wrote. Now, again, the question is asked, what does it matter? Who cares? Well, I'll tell you how it matters and why it matters. Because when you decide to work inside the canon of another person's work, it is a creative challenge to make sure that your story works within the framework that has already been established. And I love nothing more than to read a story, a tale that I've never heard before about Middle-earth that feels authentic. Like, ooh, man, this could have happened. And if it's a good story and it's well told, and the authors make it feel real because there's such an understanding and a reverence and, most importantly, a knowledge of what Tolkien did, and that is brought to bear on the story, then I'm like, that's a great story. And it goes straight up into my head canon of that could have happened in Middle-earth. Because the people that decided to tell me that story did the work. They convinced me. They made me believe. And when you're dealing with fiction, what is the thing that you want most of all? You want to be told the truth in fiction. Because people that don't adhere to the canon of Middle-earth, they're not telling you the truth. And their fiction are lies. They're lies. And they also haven't done the work. It's like anything else. If you want to be a scientist or you want to be a surgeon, you study how the human body works. You know, we're always adding to our knowledge of that, but hey, you're not going to let some surgeon out into the world that doesn't get it, doesn't understand the body. They have to go to school for a long time. They have to intern. They have to show you that they know what they're doing. And if you don't, you get cut. Why don't they do that with IPs? I mean, if you want to work in an IP, a previously established framework that has a long history of canon, how come they don't bring in people to work on these IPs that they're not tested within an inch of their lives about the IP that they're going to start working on? Because most people don't give a fuck, and I hate that. Anyway, this brings me to an article. Now that I've laid out sort of my philosophical understanding and the importance of canon, what I think, I'll get into it later. We'll talk more. But I'd like to read an article that was published yesterday in Esquire magazine, or online, Esquire Online. And here it is. The article is called, hang on, now I've got to find the article. The article is called The Problem with Canon. So, all things being equal, when I read the title of this, The Problem with Canon, you already got me. I'm already in a state. I'm already getting all lathered up and growling like a rabid dog. What problem with Canon? There's no problem with Canon. Anyway, I was not happy. Now, this article was written by, maybe it's Adrian or Adrienne Westenfeld. And who is Adrienne Westenfeld? Well, highly educated, and she is the books and fiction editor at Esquire, where she oversees book coverage, edits fiction, and curates the Esquire Book Club. She has quite the pedigree, and if I understand, not just academic, but she also has worked for a lot of great places. So I always look up the people who write these articles before I comment on them. I'm going to give Adrienne the benefit of the doubt. Adrienne, I'm a fan. I appreciate everything you've done. I think you have earned my respect as a creative force and the fact that you're working for Esquire as the fiction editor and you oversee book coverage. You're a woman after my own heart. So thank you very much for that. That said, you're wrong. Let's read your article. The Problem with Canon. Here's the headline. Rings of Power and Star Trek Strange New Worlds did the impossible, adapting behemoth pieces of IP without pissing off fans. For the most part. That's what she says in parentheses. Turns out, Star Wars and the MCU have much to learn. Oh, Adrienne, you triggered this middle-aged man. What if you gave me a stroke? Then where would I be? You wouldn't have even known, and I'd be dead. Adrienne writes, it's the best of times and the worst of times to be a fan. So already she's quoting Tale of Two Cities, okay? For devotees of mega franchises like Star Wars and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's never been a more massive glut of new content. We're living through a golden age of interconnected storytelling as sequels and prequels explode across film, television, and literature faster than many of us can keep up. Yet at the same time, these mega franchises are tormented by their most strident fans. Okay. Tormented by their most strident fans. You mean the people that care about these franchises the most? You've said strident fans in your article. I don't understand why the people that are too lazy to fucking write stories within the canon of the IP that they're working in get pissed off when the most strident fans call them on it. Do you know why we do that? Do you know why it's frustrating? Because we have done more work than the people that are now being paid lots of money to lie and write bad stories about the IPs that we've been loving and studying that have been filling our imaginations for, in some cases, decades. Make no mistake, that is the very underlying basis of all of our anger when we get mad at the creators of these new IPs. They don't know as much as the fans do, and they're getting paid to do the work within the IPs without doing the work they should have before they were getting paid to work within the IPs. That's the frustrating part, is that if I know more about the highly paid creators of an IP that I've enjoyed and I'm expected to watch as a strident fan this work, they should at least make the work, they should at least be on my level of competency. And what I don't like about it is there's this implication that the people, we should just settle. We should just settle for shitty creativity or people that haven't done the work. Would you settle for a bad open heart operation? No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't settle for a bad open heart operation. You want the best surgeon available when they cut you open into your body. Now, the answer could be, well, Rob, this isn't a life or death situation. But is it not? Is the diminishment of human imaginative endeavor, is that not as meaningful and maybe perhaps more than somebody that can save your life if you're having an open heart operation? Because we don't know what the diminishment of imagination has on the human psyche. We don't know the difference. So you know what? Maybe When you've loved something and you're a fan, when you're a strident fan your whole life, and when someone comes along and bastardizes the Tolkien, for instance, and you have spent your life figuring out everything Professor Tolkien wanted to tell you, and when you realize that someone is out there destroying his canonical work, who's to say that the psychic effects on your mind aren't as detrimental as, say, smoking a cigarette? No, I know I'm stretching things. But we don't know. We do not understand how the brain and consciousness can affect our physical being. We don't know. Now, I don't want people to go online and go, YouTube pundit and sometime filmmaker Robert Burnett has gone off the deep end. I'm speculating. And remember, all of this is delivered with tongue firmly in cheek, even though it's not. It's meant to be funny, amusing, and entertaining, but also thought-provoking. Let's go on and see what she has to say. But immediately I would say this. I am very tired of people that don't care as much about these IPs who write think pieces when immediately in their opening paragraphs they say that, yet at the same time, these mega franchises are tormented by their most strident fans, melting down into paroxysms of toxicity through petitions, review bombing, and targeted harassment campaigns, among other odious tactics. Toxic fandom is a complex beast, but at the root of its many convulsions, there's often one sore spot: the sticky concept of canon. All right, Adrian, you got me back, because while you've insulted me, I will say this. You are absolutely correct in your assessment that the one sore spot is, in fact, the sticky concept of canon. And that's why you have my respect. Because you came out, yeah, you're criticizing strident fandom, and I understand. The behavior you display is not good. I will never defend it. I do not defend people that who are writing petitions and doing review bombing and targeted harassment campaigns. I don't agree with any of that. And I think you're right. But here's the thing. Don't start out and say strident fans. You can say that there are elements of a community, but don't make it sound like every strident fan is this way. I hate that. But at least you rescue yourself at the end for me, because you say that we're all upset about the sticky concept of canon. You are correct, my dear, and I agree with you. You go on. Canon is scripture. Canon is king. Canon can do no wrong. Its definition is simple. The term refers to a fictional body of work and its established facts. But that's where the simplicity ends. In this age of massive cultural production of sequels and prequels and cinematic universes, where does canon start and stop? Do novelizations, video games, or other ancillaries count? Who gets to decide? When new entries to the canon subvert or retcon the established universe, what's to be done with those unruly fictions? Well, what's to be done is fandom rejects them. And that's what happens. That is the sole reason people reject these changing of their IPs. Now, here's the thing. Let's be really clear about this. When I'm talking about canon, I am not talking about things like, let's call it things like, if you want to say, race swapping. That isn't retconning canon, because within a canonical structure, for the most part, unless somebody's ethnicity is a part of their, I don't know, unless it's explicitly stated, it doesn't matter. And within certain canons, for instance, Marvel Comics, Nick Fury was a white dude. In the Ultimates universe, a reimagined version of the MCU, he was a black dude. That was actually patterned after Sam Jackson. Now, there are two different universes, you could say, in the original MCU. In the original comics universe, Nick Fury was a white dude, and then in the Ultimates universe, they made him Sam Jackson. Well, within Marvel Comics, then, suddenly, does it really matter? What matters is the character of Nick Fury. Does the character of Nick Fury work in the wider concept or of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? or the Marvel Comics universe as, and I think yes, he does. So does the white version of Nick Fury, Agent of Shield. So both versions can work. Now, what's really interesting is the funny thing about when you read the Ultimates, nobody said shit about Nick Fury being a black dude and looking like Sam Jackson. Why? Because he was written well. The character's a badass. In fact, I would dare say apologies to Stranko, I enjoyed the depiction of Nick Fury in the Ultimates universe. I thought it was great. And never once, other than the fact he looked like Sam Jackson, I didn't give a fuck about his race. Who cares? If the character's written well, he's written well. If race factors in to a character, then maybe, like, for instance, if somebody has tremendous guilt because their grandfather participated in the Tuskegee experiments, then I would say, okay, that his backstory, it matters. But I'll give you an example. And here's what fans do. When we are faced with changes, if the changes make sense, like I do not understand, first of all, I'll give you an example when it comes to The Little Mermaid, for instance. Haley Bailey, right? First of all, why would you complain about her being on screen ever? Don't know. But I get it. Hans Christian Andersen wrote stories, created The Little Mermaid and all that. And you could say that, okay, that was done up in, like, Denmark. It's the North Atlantic. When he created The Little Mermaid and the way The Little Mermaid has been depicted, why would you change it? Well, I would say there's nothing in those stories that matters at all. But I would even say this. As a fan, I would be like, okay, when I watch The Little Mermaid, you know what? Little Mermaid in the animated movie has a friend, Sebastian. Afro-Cuban crab. Listen to that accent. I'm like, okay, canonically, within the Little Mermaid universe, there is this crab, Sebastian the Crab, Afro-Cuban, which means that, hey, who's to say that wherever that takes place, it's not in that part of the world. You're not in the North Atlantic anymore. You're down south. Hence, Ariel doesn't have to look like she's from the North Atlantic anymore. She can be Afro-Cuban. And that's why she knows Sebastian the Crab. And canonically, that works. Doesn't break canon. I buy it. This is important. This is important because this means that canon remains unbroken. And this delightful actress, who, by the way, come on, she looks like way more of a real mermaid. Look at her awesome features, like a lot of different ethnicities within her. I think she represents a mermaid better than, say, the way Ariel honestly looks a little too Midwest for me as I watch The Little Mermaid these days. And by the way, I don't believe that the Ariel from the animated film was friends with Sebastian. I believe that this Ariel knows Sebastian because she hangs out down south. I'm down there. I'm down with this. Don't have a problem. So this is not what I would say breaking canon. This is important. Not breaking canon. Let me continue on. Now, I don't know. Your mileage may vary. I can understand it. We're going to go back to this article. Hang on. Let's go back. Let me where was I? I was somewhere. So back to the article that I was reading. So, canon is scripture. Canon is king. Canon can do no wrong. Its definition is simple. The term refers to a fictional body of work and its established facts, but that's where simplicity ends. And this is a great question. Who gets to do new entries to the canon subvert or retcon the established universe? The answer to that is no, they don't. You can here I'm like, it's so weird to be talking about this stuff because it's all made up anyway. But you know what? Just because something is made up doesn't mean it's not real. Get that through your heads. Put it on a t-shirt. Meme that shit. I'm right. You know I'm right. So here's the thing. When new entries to the canon subvert or retcon the established universe, what's to be done with these unruly fictions? You throw them away. I mean, you can make it an Elseworld story. Make it a fictitious thing. I mean, if they're retconning a universe, that immediately, here's the thing. It is just as easy to write a story within the universe that doesn't retcon the universe as it is to write one that does. So, what is important is the universe itself, the universe itself that you're working in. That's immutable. And the better off that a creator has, the better the universe is, the better the world building is, the better off you are as a creator that wants to work within the context of that world building. Now, I would say this, in the case of the Dune novels that Brian Herbert and Kevin G. Anderson wrote, I would say for the most part, they do some things that, across that you might not buy, but there is a certain reverence to Frank Herbert's initial universe. But the universe was big, so I understand there's things that they retcon that I didn't necessarily disagree with, but at least there's a reverence and a respect there. And I don't think the books are nearly as good as Frank Herbert's originals, and even Frank Herbert's Dune books. It's not like you're reading 6 of the greatest things ever written. There's places that are hard going in all 6 of those original books. I'm not going to say that everything he wrote was genius, but the ideas are important. The idea is the canon. After all, when storytellers, I'm going on with this article, when storytellers dare to expand canon, whether by disrupting the narrative or simply shining a flashlight into its unexplored corners, there can be hell to pay. Increasingly, fans have become canon's militant enforcers. When those seeking to enlarge canon stray across its perceived guardrails, like J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson, backlash is swift and vociferous. In one memorable dust-up, Star Wars fans petitioned for Disney to erase The Last Jedi from the franchise's canon altogether. Somehow, canon, at once a collective orthodoxy and a personal totem, inflected with each viewer's own biases and desires, and even their own bigotry too. Adrian. Biases and desires, and you're a smart woman. Don't buy into this. Remember what's happening. The reason people got pissed off at J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson is simple. They took characters they didn't create and changed them into something that they are not. That's what they did. All right? And I'll tell you, I have no problem if you want to tell the story of a former hero who's fallen from grace. Those are great stories. Tell them to me. I want to hear them. However, in the case of Luke Skywalker in Force Awakens, this is well-trodden ground, but I just want to make a point. I want to make a point. If you're a kid and you're 8 years old and you haven't started watching Star Wars yet, and you are shown Star Wars for the very first time at 8, and this is when stories maybe matter the most, when you're most impressionable and you're trying to understand the world that we live in. And what are the important lessons your parents are trying to impart to you? And they introduce you to Star Wars. And they're even going to guide you through it. They're going to guide you through Star Wars. And you're watching it, and if they don't follow the right order by showing you Star Wars first, and then Empire, then Jedi, or if you want to follow the machete order, the order that I would suggest parents show their Star. Here's how if you're a true Renaissance parent, you show your child Star Wars and get the original, not the special edition. Empire, the special edition is not as nearly as egregious. And then you go back, No, I Am Your Father. And then you go the machete order, and then you show your kid Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and then Return of the Jedi. Let me say that again. Here's how you show kids, if you're a responsible parent, here's how you show kids Star Wars in the proper way. Star Wars, Empire, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Return of the Jedi. And you're going to say to me, Rob, well, that's not what George Lucas wanted. And I would argue, and this is another thing that I was going to get to, but I'll say it right now. The problem with George Lucas was George Lucas changed, and the reason he created, you can't just give a creator a pass like George Lucas, because people change. And I would say that there's an argument to be made that the only canon that you should really pay attention to in the Star Wars universe is Star Wars and Empire. I would even take away Jedi, but I know I'm breaking my own rules about canon when I'm talking about canon for Star Wars. But back to my original point. However you show your kids Star Wars, the important thing is after you get to Return of the Jedi, all right, you're a kid, you're 8 years old. You watch Return of the Jedi. You've seen the struggle. You've seen the rebels defeat the Empire. You've seen Luke stand up to Vader and the Empire. You've seen Vader redeemed by his son. Great story, right? And then your kid, as soon as Jedi's over, he's like, next one, next one, next one. And you put in Force Awakens. How are you going to explain to your kid what happened to Luke Skywalker between the end of Return of the Jedi to the end of The Force Awakens, when Luke is on Achito, hanging out, disgraced, whatever? Why is R2 fucking D2 under a goddamn tarp to give you BB-8? How are you going to explain that to him? You're going to explain corporations and consumerism and merchandising and all that, and that how decisions in Force Awakens were based on money rather than the story that was being told? See, this is another problem. J.R.R. Tolkien might have been thinking about money, but he wasn't thinking about it when he created the great fictional worlds. While people put a lot of time in them, nobody spends that much time on their fictional worlds expecting to make money, because it doesn't matter how much you get back. You never get enough back to pay for the time that you spent creating a fictional world. So I would say, and maybe this is me being naive, but here's the problem. So when you watch Force Awakens, it feels false. It is a bastardization of a story that should never existed in the first place. And that's why people are mad. It's not because they hate a certain individual. What they hate is what the individual did to a character that was beloved without any. You can't just go from D to Z and expect us to buy into it without giving us the rest of the alphabet. Like, how'd you get to Z, man? Why is like, we just saw Luke save the fucking galaxy, and in the next movie he's some old man schleprock on a rock, living on this island, and R2-D2's under a tarp, and C-3PO has a goddamn red arm, and the Millennium Falcon is sitting on a planet somewhere for years with a goddamn rectangular dish on it. Well, what the fuck is that all about? That's not good storytelling. Well, Rob, it's new. It subverts expectations. No, it's just bad. It's just bad. And none of those decisions were based on the canon or based on that fictitious universe. The reason C-3PO has a red fucking arm is because Bad Robot wanted to get the merchandising, or a piece of the merchandising, for every red-armed C-3PO that was sold. It was done to make money. And if that's all you're doing with your canon, you've broken canon. You've wrecked it. And we all know. And if a creator has done that to a story, then their story becomes invalid. Now, we'll watch it all. We'll watch it. It made $2 billion at the box office. But at the end of the day, when was the last time you went back and watched Force Awakens and really thought to yourself, I really love this. I really like watching all these X-Wing fighters flying so low over the water. I really love the fact that, they try to be clever and go back 30 years later. They're using Macquarie concept designs for their X-Wing fighters. First of all, why the fuck are there X-Wing fighters at all? I mean, seriously, why? Why are there? I don't know. The whole thing about Star Wars was they created shit. When I was a kid, when Empire came out, I'm like, I had my Jedi and TIE Fighter. I had a TIE Fighter flying model rocket. I had a Darth Vader plastic model. I had X-Wings coming out my wazoo. I couldn't wait to see Empire. What did I get in Empire? Snow speeders. I got ATSTs. I got AT-ATs. I got a super fucking Star Destroyer. I got something new I hadn't seen before. That was rad. Force Awakens, what did I get? A black X-Wing? I'm like, look at that paint job. I wanted something new. Give me something new. I don't even understand what the resistance is. Who are they resisting against? Why is there a need for a resistance when in the previous movie I watched all of my friends destroy the Empire? Bad storytelling. Bad violations of canon. Horrible. That's why people get mad, because what was written and what was given to us is stupid and uncreative. And you know what? What makes it worse is, in the interim, we've received many different Star Wars stories, whether it was the Dark Empire comics from the early 90s, along with Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy, which expand the universe and don't break canon. And they're a lot more interesting than what we were served up by Disney after a corporation bought these stories. I mean, we all know about it. I don't have to get into that. But this is why people get mad. This is why fans get mad. They're not mad For the reason, and you said it, Adrian, they're mad because canon was broken by people that aren't creative enough. They didn't take enough time, and they didn't give the audience and, fans, they didn't give us enough credit and respect for the time that we've kept that franchise alive the whole time when there wasn't new movies. We're the reason that you've made it in the first place. Stalwart fans. Gets angry. Anyway, and that's why the backlash against Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams is swift and vociferous. Let's go back to the idea of what great world building does. Let's go back to what it means psychologically for people. Life is hard enough. And, rather than say, take, Percocet or Zoloft or pick your poison, whatever you take internally to make yourself physically feel better, we use great storytelling and great world building to make us mentally feel better, psychically feel better. So why is it that, you wouldn't take that's why you can't get great ecstasy or great cocaine anymore, because some asshole cuts it with fentanyl. Who wants to do that? That's why you can't take good drugs. I'm kidding, sort of. But here's the thing. Why would you take a bad story then? Why would you put a bad story into your imagination? Why would you want to do that? I would argue that could be as psychically damaging to your mind as a bad drug is to your body. I mean, it might not kill you immediately, but it might kill a little bit of your soul day after day after day. Who knows? Who's ever done that research? Don't know if you can. Canon has a big problem. Adrian, I know. Canon has a big problem, and the call is coming from. First of all, you know what? Before I get more into this, let's see. People have been firing in super chats. I want to get to your super chats. I want to hear what you have to say, because I could go on and on and on about this, and I'm going to. So Sidhu says, "Greetings, relisher of redheads. Just watch the Banshees of Inisherin. Almost as good as Three Billboards, but so much funnier. It will get Best Picture and all the acting nominations. And random theory, are xenomorphs in the Avatar world? Don't know. Xenomorphs could be in the Avatar world because Disney now owns both Alien and the Avatar franchises. That could be interesting. It could be. I like that to do, but I think you're right. Banshees of Inisherin looks great. The lovely Connie Sang is here. Connie says, Rob, I'm taking a pause to let you know I'm watching Martyrs. Anna just found the secret room. Send positive vibes. How can you watch Martyrs? You are watching the French version, please, right? Yes? Well, I'm glad you're watching Martyrs. Thank you for that. Kevin, who's been a member for 13 months, just writes in, and then he sends a super chat and says, thoughts on Brian Fuller doing a Friday the 13th prequel show? Kevin, I love Brian Fuller. I love Brian Fuller as a person, and I love him as a creator. And I thought what Brian Fuller did, you want to see somebody subvert canon done correctly? I'm a huge fan of Thomas Harris's books. I've got first editions of all of them. Well, I don't have Black Sunday, but I loved the Hannibal Lecter novels, and I liked the movies. What Brian Fuller did with the Hannibal TV series was exquisite. It's 3 seasons of some of the best horror television ever made. Everything about it, from its design to its casting to its writing, cinematography, everything about Hannibal I love. If Brian Fuller, you have to understand, Brian Fuller is a guy that's going to make this show his life's fucking ambition to make this thing work. And I knew that this was in the works. Actually, I knew it was in the works years ago, but the legal disposition of the franchise kept it from happening. Brian Fuller's been thinking a lot about this story. The prequel to Friday the 13th. Where's Jason's dad? Anyway, all I can tell you is I'm excited. Kevin Rubio says, but what of Andor and Tony Gilroy? George didn't write that. But Kevin, what I said earlier, here's what I'm saying, is that when new creators work in the universe, as long as they adhere to the canon that exists, and I would say that one of the great things about Andor that makes Andor so great is it completely exists within the world that the original Star Wars sets up. It does not contradict anything. And like all great extrapolations within a canon, it makes the universe a richer, better place because it respects the canon of the original IP. More so than just about anything else. Andor is a far more respectable show than, say, the Book of Boba Fett, that I think doesn't exactly add to the Star Wars universe in a constructive way. Whereas Andor absolutely does. Andor takes everything we learned about the Star Wars universe, in specifically Star Wars and Empire, and pluses it. It does not break canon. And it gives us a different kind of a story. I don't think George Lucas would have ever told the story of Andor, but ironically, if you look at what he was doing in THX 1138 and how him and Coppola talked about actually going to Vietnam during the war to shoot Apocalypse Now. So I'd be very curious to hear what George Lucas thinks about Andor. I'll bet. I mean, he probably doesn't like the fact that, well, it's not for kids, and I don't know if. But I think it's a spectacular series because it doesn't break canon. Carlos Fontes says, I know Spectre wasn't received too warmly, but I love how No Time to Die leaned into it and made it retroactively better. Maybe. I didn't like either movie. I hate the fact that they tried to create a link between Blofeld and Bond. Why would you do that? I mean, that is a fundamental change of Bond's character. That's what I'm talking about. Spectre is not a good movie, and I think No Time to Die isn't a very good movie either. But again, No Time to Die might be better than Spectre, and the fact that it made Spectre a little better doesn't matter to me. I think that the Daniel Craig era of Bond was ultimately a failure, although Casino Royale is really good. Martin Molina says, Evening, Rob. My girlfriend and I watched Nosferatu for the first time at the Alamo Drafthouse for the 100-year anniversary. An original score by the Invincible Czars was played live during the film. Loved it. Well, first of all, Martin, you're a good man. You park your shuttlecraft in my shuttle bay. And the fact that you have a girlfriend who would do that with you proves you have great taste. So that's the way to go. And well done. You tell your girlfriend, well done for me. And the fact that you went and saw Nosferatu. I love that. I love that you did that. Cosmix says, currently reading Bob Iger's The Ride of a Lifetime and Regis Fils-Aimé Disrupting the Game. Both are amazing so far. Wish Reggie was in Chapek's spot. Yeah, I can see that. I understand why you can think that. I mean, hopefully it'll be great. Bryson Noble sends in a super chat, and then he follows it up with another super chat and says, sorry, Rob, random question, answer whenever you want. Have you seen Nick Cage in David Lynch's Wild at Heart? I'm looking for a review and summary. Well, I loved Wild at Heart. I own Wild at Heart. Would you be surprised to know I have it on Blu-ray? Which I do. I love Wild at Heart. I don't know if I could get it. You know what? I wouldn't want to do a review of it right now because I'd want to watch it again. I haven't seen it in a long time. But, man, Lula and Sailor, what a couple. And Sherilyn Fenn's in that movie. The car crash, she's wandering around. I love Wild at Heart. But I can't give you, because I've got to get back to my canon thing here. Narul Ilyana asks, do you think Feige's Star Wars films will follow canon? Yes, I do. I think Kevin Feige will lean into canon because here's the thing about what now this is important. I was going to get to this. Adaptation. Like there's a lot of people that the MCU is an adaptation of the Marvel Comics universe. Just like Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings movies was adapting Tolkien. And I would say, here's what I would say in terms of, like, for instance, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings plays a lot with the timeline in the sense that after Bilbo's party and the time frame between Gandalf going away and coming back and things like that is totally compressed in Jackson's movie. But the thing is, you know, while you could probably take into account it was decades before Gandalf came back with the ring and the knowledge of the ring and all that, to me, by compressing that time, you're not breaking canon. That's adapting something to another medium because you have to make it adaptable. And you could say that, okay, well, that to me isn't canon. The canon is like the world. Like, for instance, Sauron, the depiction of Sauron in Lord of the Rings, I guess, you know, real canonistas could say, you know, the all-seeing eye and all of that. Was that really what Tolkien meant? But when you're adapting it into a form, you have to depict Sauron somehow, and so whether he walked around in that kind of a suit of armor. Now, to me, that is a nebulous area, but what I would say that Peter Jackson did, and he said it himself, is that whenever he could, they always went back to what Tolkien, the spirit of Tolkien. So yeah, Jackson he adapted Lord of the Rings, but I don't think he necessarily broke Tolkien's canon. And it's a fine line. It's definitely a fine line. But he didn't go back and say retcon when certain people existed in what age or how long. Like, if I had made, like, there's one thing in Rings of Power, I understand that it took decades to forge the rings. Now, you couldn't, I compressing the time, that doesn't bother me. But who was there and how they were forged and why and what was going on and the worlds of men, and I don't feel that Rings of Power did a good job at all remaining in Tolkien's canon. It was just willy-nilly. They just changed a bunch of stuff to fit TV, and here's another thing. Here's the Harfoots. The idea was that, well, you can't make Lord of the Rings. You can't make a Lord of the Rings show without the hobbits. Yeah, you can. Yes, you can. But the fact is, they felt the need to know we have to have something that viewers that love Lord of the Rings can relate to them. We have to. Why? That to me is not creative, and that is what they're trying to do, is draw some parallel where none existed. And anyway, I'll continue. Matt Tween says the problem with canon is the writer's inability to care or step up to the challenge to continue the story. Well said, sir. I totally agree with you, 100%. 100%. And that's why Andor works. Andor is telling a great story within the framework of the canon of the Star Wars universe that George Lucas and his collaborators set up even in the first Star Wars movie. So, Matt Guy says, I bought book 1 of Sandman today on your recommendation. I'm going to start reading it tomorrow. I love the Netflix show and looking forward to season 2. Matt, here's some advice. The first 7 issues of Sandman, there's a lot of great stuff in there. 24 hours, the story when they go to hell and all that. It's a little nebulous and murky because when he first started writing the Sandman, it was tied to the DC universe. And it was a horror comic. It wasn't until you get to issue 8, The Sound of Her Wings, which was depicted in episode 6 of the series, when you meet Death. That's when you're off to the races and you're cooking with fire. Just understand that in the beginning of Sandman, it's a little strange going in and out of the stories, but it's still great. Papa Jish says, I love your George Lucas impression. Laugh out loud. Well, I tell them to do things better and faster. That's my direction. I'm glad you like that. I mean, I by the way, I stole my Lucas impression from friends of mine like Darren Doctorman and Steve Melching. It's not as good as them. Cincinnati's 5-star barber. How are you, sir? My boy Rob still stoked over the Avatar trailer. Me too. And feeling good about that IP not being destroyed. Me too. You're right. The glorious canon of our beloved IPs has been cut with baby laxative. And you know what's sad about that? It's the same thing. Whoever cut our glorious IPs with baby laxative, they're making more money, but we get an inferior product, which ultimately makes us realize that we shouldn't be buying from them in the first place. If you're going to cut your product with baby laxative, I respect you less. I understand that you as a businessman, why don't you give me something that's not cut with baby laxative and charge me more? I'll pay a premium. Just make sure it's quality, uncut flake. I want my fatty rails to be laxative free. So anyway, and I do, which is why I stopped doing drugs, because the purity of it all went. I'm kidding, of course. A Silly Goose says, all right, after hearing your passionate words on the Forge of God and Anvil of Stars from last night, I went ahead and bought the paperbacks of both. Silly Goose, not enough. You need to read them. You need to read them, and you need to get back to me. I want your book review. I want you to send me a letter. They're free. You don't have to send me a super chat. Send me a letter. Tell me what you thought of them. If you didn't like them, tell me what you thought. If I spoiled too much, tell me that too. But cheers to you. Actually, this is just water, so Cheers to you for buying those books. I think you're going to like it. Brandon Martin says, The Apes trilogy and Blade Runner 2049 are masterclasses in expanding and respecting canon. Give Matt Reeves and Denis Villeneuve all the canons. Brandon Martin, you and I, sir, we park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. You are absolutely correct. And that's why, I mean, those films, there's a lot of people that might not like Blade Runner 2049 or The Apes. I grew up with the Planet of the Apes movies, and let's we not forget, like, there was a writer named Paul Den who worked on, I believe, all 4 of the original sequels, Beneath, Escape, Conquest, and Battle. I think he worked on all of those. So there was a pretty, I mean, the time travel element, it is a little loosey-goosey. Like, people are going to look at me right now and go, Rob, how are the apes able to take crashed spaceships with all of that technology and get them space-worthy so they could leave the Earth before the Earth was blown up by the bomb at the end of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, travel back in time through Hessline's theory of time travel or time, space, whatever, Dr. Hessline, and get back to Earth of the 1970s in Escape from the Planet of the Apes? I don't know. And yes, I think that's a problem. I think that's a big, gigantic plot hole. And I'm the first to admit it. But you know what? Don't give a fuck. Do not care. You get one big ask from me. If I'm already believing that apes are real, I'll believe that ape scientists with assistance were able to get those ships into space again. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they figured out that there was some kind of radiation. They just had to make them airtight or something, and they activated them. Who knows? I don't know. Jono D says, can canon be fixed once it's broken? This is a great question. Oh, wait. First of all, Connie says, yep, 2008. I'm off to eat some meat now. Well, that's good. Can't wait. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Jono D says, can canon be fixed once it's broken? Why can't HBO remake season 8 of Game of Thrones or the Star Wars sequel series be decanonized, remade if they are poorly received? Well, they could be. The problem is they've already spent too much money, so I don't think anybody would do that. I mean, I honestly believe that there is a great... I really do. I think that I've never seen a franchise damaged as much. Well, look, let's say they did it in 2 movies, Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. And I'll say there are things in Last Jedi I actually quite enjoy. But there's a lot of it that's really, really dunderheaded, like that slow chase, like that movie. I mean, you could actually fix Last Jedi. I think you could re-edit that movie and fix it. If you kept everything that was there, you could fix it. You'd still have the ultimate problem of Luke's... Look, I would say this. The problem with the Disney sequel trilogy is that what ruined the Disney sequel trilogy was the very idea behind why those movies were made. And the thing was, what Disney should have done, and a corporation won't do this because it's not what corporations do. A corporation, first of all, if I had run Disney and I had spent $4 billion for Star Wars, I would have called my 10 favorite filmmakers. And I would have said, okay, I bought Star Wars. I want you guys and girls, whomever my favorite filmmakers were, and if I was Bob Iger, and have some kind of a summit, bring them in and go, give me some of your ideas. Then I would have hired Lucasfilm Story Group. I would have said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through the entirety of the expanded universe, every comic book, every novel, everything that currently exists that has been written on Star Wars, because a lot of people, Star Wars novelists and comic creators, worked on those things because they love them. I mean, even when comic books sell a lot, it's not like, these aren't the halcyon days of when Image Comics was selling 1 million issues and Rob Liefeld was pocketing $1 million a month, or Todd McFarlane was pocketing 3 or whatever. And I would have said, go look through all of the expanded universe. You've got all of these great story ideas that have been done by people and then get a list of who wrote the best, who are the 10 people that wrote the best Star Wars expanded universe stuff, and go bring them in. Bring Dave Filoni in from the beginning and have a summit and figure out what's the story you're going to tell. But then again, a guy like Bob Iger, there's nobody at a corporation that's already a story expert, because that's not what they do. I mean, there are story experts at Pixar. I mean, there's ways you could have done it, but that's not what a corporation does. But that's what I would have done. And the frustrating part, like with my beloved franchise, there's over 1,000 Star Trek novels. And in those, there's about 100 that have great ideas for new series and extrapolations on where things have gone in the Star Trek universe. All of that is now being pilfered by the writers of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and the writers who did the original work aren't being credited, like Margaret Wanderer and women writers are being ripped off. Margaret Wanderer Bonanno, who came up with the idea of Pike remembering or knowing his fate in the episode or in the book Burning Dreams. Una's entire backstory was created by Dorothy Fontana in her novel Vulcan's Glory. They're ripping off Ursula K. Le Guin. 3 female science fiction writers were completely ripped off in the first season of Strange New Worlds. Totally ripped off. Well, look, man, if you're going to take a story and you're especially give the writer credit, the first season Star Trek The Next Generation, or Star Trek, the first season original series episode Arena with the Gorn, where they introduced the Gorn, that was inspired by a short story by a guy named Frederick Brown. He got a story credit. They probably paid him something. Nowadays they don't. Well, we own it. It's written a novel. CBS owns it. Look, you know what? It was a novel. It wasn't a screenplay. It was a novel. It was in a whole different form, and yes, CBS owns it. But you're pilfering their ideas and their work. Give them credit. Give them credit. Just say it. If you don't want to take it up front because you guys want to get all the money, I get it. I understand. Give them credit in the end titles. Stories suggested by. If you're going to rip off Ursula K. Le Guin's Those Who Walk Away from Umlaus, a very famous science fiction story, and Alex Kurtzman flat out says it in interviews, give her credit. Story suggested by Ursula K. Le Guin. Why not do that, you thieves? You thieves. But they won't. So anyway, now everyone's like, well, Rob, you suggested that they should delve into Star Trek novels for stories. Yeah, but I never thought they wouldn't give the people who wrote the novels credit. I mean, it's so lame. Okay, since you got me on a Star Trek rant, here's something I fucking hate. In Strange New Worlds, Akiva Goldsman inexplicably decides to make the Gorn, the lizard creature that Kirk fights in Arena, the Gorn has become a pop culture delight. Everyone, they make TV commercials where Shatner and the Gorn are sitting on a table or sitting on a couch at Christmas time, wherever the fuck they're doing it at. Okay, so in Akiva Goldsman's genius mind, he decides, we're going to take back the Gorn and we're going to turn them into evil alien xenomorphs. And hey, we'll rip off aliens with their life cycle and all that. Aliens, But here's the thing. Complete misunderstanding of the Gorns. Why? Here's how dumb modern Star Trek is. Here's how much I hate modern Star Trek. So rather than do the thing that would be interesting, which is make the Gorns, how do you go? So they just flat out, Akiva Goldsman has said the Gorns are just evil. That is, as a lifelong Star Trek fan, I'm like, wow, how uncreative can you get? But I would expect nothing less of Star Trek since 2009, which is why, and I'm not the only one who knows this anymore, there are other people in the world who can confirm that I'm not wrong about Star Trek Picard Season 3. And they also confirmed that I'm right when I say, for all of you people out there who think, look, I hated Picard Seasons 1 and 2. Hated them. Hated those shows with a passion. Not as much as I hate Star Trek Discovery, but close. Actually, that's true. I hate them all. Star Trek Picard Season 3, totally different show. Totally different show. Yeah, are there ties to Season 1 and 2? Unfortunately. But as far as talk about a course correction, I think people are going to look, how do you take a ruined franchise and fix it? Star Trek Picard Season 3 does. And if you don't believe me, give it 30 minutes. If you're not in, and there's going to be some people that aren't in just because I've said this now, But for all of you who are really who are like Quado said, open your mind. If you're really interested, give it 30 minutes. 30 minutes in, at the 30-minute, 35-minute mark of episode 1 of Picard season 3. If you're not in, you call your Bobster here and you say, Bob, I'm out. I understand. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. Papa Jish says, delete, recreate, or leave alone. Star Trek, Star Wars, or Game of Thrones. I would leave alone Game of Thrones. As much as I couldn't stand season 8, I would leave it alone, because most of Game of Thrones, 80% of the original Game of Thrones series, even season 7 and 8 that I have a lot of problems with, are pretty damn good. All the way up through the end of season 6. I mean, seasons 5 and 6, still. I'd leave Game of Thrones alone. When you say recreate or delete, are you talking about... I would delete all Star Trek since 2009, with the exception of Picard season 3. I would delete Lower Decks. I would delete Prodigy, even though those aren't egregious. I would delete Discovery and delete Picard and delete Strange New Worlds. I don't think a franchise has suffered as much damage as Star Trek has. Star Trek 09, Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek Beyond, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, and Prodigy. I'd get rid of them all. And I'd recreate Star Wars. So, there you go. Darth Plato says the Dorne arc was ruined. It was ruined. Dorne was done dirty in Game of Thrones, and that was the worst. And so are the snakes. Everything was. It's true. Anyway, let's see. People are firing in tips. You can fire in tips. It's different than super chats. But Sheriff Carl, my boy Sheriff Carl, sends in a $666 tip. Man, I'm glad I am stoned in bed watching and listening to you rant about how shitty the Star Wars sequels are. Nobody does it better. My friends and I have been high and drunk and conjured up far better Star Wars because we get it and love this shit. These fucks don't. Well, here's the thing. I don't think that they don't. The problem is they're constrained, especially Star Wars, is really constrained by what the corporate overlords want. And I don't mean like men sitting in a room going, hey, like Mr. Smithers or whatever. They're not doing that. A corporation needs to make money, and it needs to make money for its shareholders. And by doing that, they have to use their spreadsheets and analytics and marketing reports and all that, and appeal to the largest common denominator. Disney is a global corporation. They're trying to make something for the world at large, for families, for everybody. But I would say that when it comes to telling stories, especially in beloved IPs, George Lucas wasn't doing that when he created Star Wars. George Lucas had his own, as one man was trying to create or recreate Flash Gordon, which made it great. And so that's what he was doing. But when a corporation takes this on, the uniqueness that makes the franchise unique, suddenly it becomes, okay, well, we have to have a Luke-like archetype. And, since we live in the era we live in, what if we flipped the gender of Luke and made it a Disney princess? Now, that makes sense. Here's the thing. You could. And Disney has told us, Pixar has told us great stories about female characters, female protagonists. And lest we not forget, Disney, because John Lasseter wanted to do this, brought Miyazaki's movies, like Princess Mononoke, a great film with a great central female protagonist. As a dude, I have no problem with strong female characters if they're well written. When we get a terrible copy of Luke that is pretty much nonsensical, who is, people have talked about Rey ad infinitum. I don't have to, whatever, for infinitely. I don't need to explain why that character was badly written, but it's not a bad character because it's a female character. It's a bad character because it was Rey is a badly written and conceived character that doesn't actually go through a hero's journey. That's the problem with Rey. The hero's journey that she goes through is not a true hero's journey. It was like drinking Tang instead of orange juice. Rey is a powdered drink version of Luke Skywalker. What you want is fresh squeezed orange juice with the pulp still in the glass. That's Luke. Rey is Tang. And that's the problem, is they give us some or regurgitated ideas, all this amalgamation of what is the most inoffensive, easily digestible version of a character. And let's make that, because it's got to appeal to the most amount. And what people don't realize is those characters don't live in our imaginations. Generic paint by numbers characters never live in our imaginations. What do live in our imaginations? The characters that we find memorable, the characters that have traits, all different kinds of traits. And Ray, people call her, the funny thing about people talk about the concept of a Mary Sue character. I don't think a Mary Sue character is what Ray is. A Mary Sue character is when the author of said story inserts themselves as the actual main character of the story. And a lot of that came out of Star Trek fiction. There were some Star Trek novels, like I think that Diane Carey wrote, like Dreadnought, where she was writing an avatar of herself into the stories as the main character, and that character ends up saving all of our heroes. So to me, Ray, and the meaning of a Mary Sue character has been changed, but the original meaning was when the author inserted themselves into a story so they could interact with their favorite fictional characters and end up saving the day. That's what a Mary Sue character was. It started out as an avatar character for the author themselves. And usually it really came out of the fact that it was Mary Sue's because a lot of these authors were female. And I understand that that's how they expressed their fandom. And the funny thing is I wasn't necessarily against Mary Sue characters. But a character like Ray she's not a Mary Sue, she's unbelievable. And I think there's a difference. She's an unbelievable character. She's not a Mary Sue character. I think she was a pandering character because what they're trying to do is flip this, we have to give... And you know what the funny thing is I understand that Ray and having representation is a good thing. But you know what would even be better? If Ray was a great female protagonist. Because nobody cares whether a protagonist is a male or female. You don't watch Alien and think to yourself, well, I can't believe that Sigourney Weaver, the chick who winds up with the cat, she winds up alone with the cat at the end of the movie. She's a crazy cat lady, and she's the one that triumphs when all the men are stupid. She triumphs because she's the smartest fucking person on the ship. And she's not smarter at the expense of everyone else. She's not she doesn't do stupid things. When Ripley confronts Dallas and says, look, we have protocols in place for a reason. And you know what? She was correct. She wasn't some shrew of a female character that's browbeating the men. She's like, look, I'm not questioning your judgment, but we got to adhere to protocol. And she was correct. They didn't know that there was an evil agent working against them on the ship in the guise of Ash. He's a goddamn robot. But, just write me a good character. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what gender they are. I don't care what their sexuality is or their religious beliefs. Write me a great character that's believable. You give me a great character, I'll watch it. I'll go see your movie in the theater. I'll buy your 4K disc as long as it's in Dolby Atmos and HDR, right? You know what I'm saying? I don't really think that fans care. Yes, we've been branded fandom. There's been a lot of horrible behavior because fans are, I'll say it, I'm one of them. I growing up as a fan, we're not exactly the most self-actualized people in the world. That's why we're fans. We've had to turn to other places to find satisfaction in our broken, lonely lives. Just kidding. Most of the fans I've met actually are pretty delightful, and I've been in fan circles since I was a little kid. But the thing is, we're really into it. And we don't like to be, it's like anybody else. Don't lie to fans with shitty characters and try and pass it off as great writing. Tell us, I was hired to work on the most expensive TV show ever made, and I'm going to write to the best of my ability, and I know, and you know, that I'm not the best person for the job, but I'm going to do the best I can and make as much money as I'm going to do it. I've got, Amazon behind me. Just be honest. And if you're honest and say, yeah, one, we had agenda, we had to fill quotas, we had to make sure. There's nothing wrong with that. Just say it. If you want to make something that's more inclusive, I have no problem with that. I really don't. I don't care. But here's the thing: if you're going to lead with that and tell me that, well, you know why you should like this story because it has more representation in it. Don't tell me that. Tell me you've written a great story that respects the IP that you're working in. It respects the canon. That's all you have to tell me. And no one else will care. If the story's good, John Campea says winning trumps everything. If you tell me a great story and you give me great characters, no one cares what color they are, what gender they are, what sexuality they are. They don't give a fuck. If the characters are great and they're really well written and they're really memorable and they kick ass, then people will embrace them. The problem is that that's secondary now. And we as fans, we want, you know what? What did I say earlier? There is truth in fiction. Great fiction is truthful. And the problem is you're compromising your great fiction by leading with the messaging. You'll never win doing that. No one wants to be preached to. Give me a great character. And again, if Ray was a great character, and by the way, you think that Finn, John Boyega, you had a great actor. You had a really interesting idea in Finn. A stormtrooper with a conscience. A stormtrooper with a conscience. A stormtrooper that rejects what he's been born and bred for, or what he was kidnapped for. And that's a great idea. What did you do with that? Talk about somebody who deserves to be pissed off. John Boyega, no one, if you'd given us a great story, nobody would have ever, you could have done it could have been great. Could have been great. A stormtrooper with a conscience. What'd you do with it? Nothing. And John Boyega is a great actor. You let the man down. Anyway, so Sheriff Carl sends in, Sonny Dominguez, our friend Sonny, says, see the trailer for the Kino Lorber documentary Brainwashed, Sex, Camera, and Power. Nina Menkes argues that shot design is gendered, exploring the problematic male gaze through clips from hundreds of movies. Is this why we haven't seen any sexy films lately? Well, here's the funny thing about that. Here's the funny thing. This idea that the male gaze is somehow bad is wrong. What is bad is not respecting women and respecting their abilities. But the male gaze should never go away. It's biologically hardwired into us. And, brainwashed, sex, camera, power. How about this? I recently got this. The House of Psychotic Women. All right? This is based on a book written by a woman who loves exploitation movies about women who go crazy and nuts and all that. So, brainwash, sex, camera, power. Shot design is gendered. Look, you know what? It is gendered. Do you know why? Because men were making movies. I mean, how is that? The funny thing is do you think that it's really interesting, the flip side. Do you think that as more and more women filmmakers start making movies, that they're not going to look at things through the female gaze? And God bless them. Please do. Please tell stories through the female gaze. How are you going to expect people not to? This idea that we want to get away from gender and biology is silly because we can't, one. And two, embrace it. Acknowledge it and embrace these things. Understand these things. But again, brainwash, sex, camera, power. Look, I understand. Men have been assholes for thousands of years. But hey, and things change and people get better. Just like women couldn't vote. Now they can vote. Things will change, and things are changing, and they will change for the better. But you're never going to get rid of the male gaze. I'll watch the documentary, though. I mean, to me, that's fascinating. Learn about these things. We should learn about these things. The more we know, right? Sheriff Carl goes on to say, I completely agree with you on all of your points. The shareholders make their money, but we, the diehards, lose. They aren't making the money off of it that they could because they fuck things up too much by not treating the material seriously and sincerely. Well, Sheriff Carl, I would posit this. The big problem that we have is that corporations that are in charge, they're buying these things and they make money off the stories being told, but the people that run corporations aren't storytellers. So then they have to go then find storytellers. But the criteria of hiring storytellers is that they look at your past successes and base everything you have on your box office. Like there's no team going, there's only one person at Disney. Is Kevin Feige. Say what you want about Kevin Feige, but the MCU became the most successful franchise in history because you have a man in Kevin Feige who understood his own IP. And remember, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is unique amongst IPs in that it's adapting the comics. There is no canon to break in the MCU because they are creating and adapting the Marvel Comics universe into something new, into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is informed by the comic universe, they're adapting those comics, but they're creating a new alternative canon. So as they've moved along, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has indeed created their own canon. That is why, kids, I can get excited for the depiction of Namor as being a Mesoamerican or coming from a Mesoamerican roots. He's not the Namor from the comics. His creation was informed, Ryan Coogler was informed by the Namor from the comics, but he then created Namor that exists within the canon of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this is the kind of shit that drives me crazy. Well, Rob, in the comics, I don't give a fuck what happened in the comics. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is its own thing. It doesn't contradict what happened in the comics. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is just that. And they have not introduced Namor. They're slowly introducing mutants. And the idea of the Talocan, I can't wait. Do they just call themselves? I want to know, are they a Talocan Empire? Are they a hegemony, a confederacy? I hope they are not just the Talocan. The Talocan, the kingdom of Talocan, maybe? Then I know it's a kingdom. I want to know. But I'm excited for this. I love the idea that Namor, they've given an Earth-based culture. And, you know, the Mayans, man, they disappeared. Where'd they go? Underwater. I don't know, but however they're going to explain it, I can't wait. Now, that to me is cool. That's why I embrace it. I'm not a Marvel shill. I'm like, okay, you can't, the way Namor was created and exists in the Marvel comic universe, you haven't got there yet. You can't have that character exist the way he is in the comics, exactly the way it exists in the MCU. You have to adapt that character. But the essence of the character is there, and I love the fact that they're making it it's going to be the Namor of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This is different, and people don't understand. This is different. That's why I don't have a problem. What I do have a problem with are shitty movies like Thor: Love and Thunder, which was unbalanced and turned Thor, especially the first 20 minutes, into a buffoon, and I hated it. So anyway. But yeah, so there's many different forces at work. Great storytelling. It's so funny to me because I think as a rule, great storytelling will always endure. Truthful, the more truth your fiction has, the better off it is. And the more truth stories have in them, because stories have their own logic and truth unto themselves, and we all recognize it. And when they're bad stories, we recognize it. And it pisses us off. Hitchcock is the GOAT. Says, hi, Rob. I hope you're getting enough sleep. I can't believe you're doing this live stream right now on top of the hours you put in with Campy during the week. Don't forget to care about yourself. I love your dedication, content, and opinions. Well, I'll tell you what. We got off early today. And you know what I did? I got home. I think I got home at 3 o'clock. I took a nap until 7. And I set this show up last night. So I had already pulled this article, this Esquire article, which, by the way, let me get back to it. Let me finish the article. Okay, now here we go. Where I left off is, where does canon start and stop? Do novelizations, video game, or other ancillaries count? And who gets to decide? When new entries to the canon subvert or retcon the established universe, what's to be done with those unruly fictions? After all, when storytellers dare to expand canon, whether by disrupting the narrative or simply shining a flashlight into its underexplored corners, there can be hell to pay. I already read that, but I'll read it again because this is important. Increasingly, fans have become canon's militant enforcers. When those seeking to enlarge canon stray across its perceived guardrails, like J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson, backlash is swift and vociferous. In one memorable dust-up, Star Wars fans petitioned for Disney to erase The Last Jedi from the franchise's canon altogether. Somehow canon is at once a collective orthodoxy and a personal totem, inflected with each viewer's own biases and desires, even their own bigotry too. Again, I hate all that. The fact is, J.J. Abrams was hired because of his industry connections. He was a man that every interview he did, when he was shilling, when he was on the sale, and I shouldn't say shilling. I respect J.J. Abrams for all the work that he's done in the industry, and he's made a lot of money. I don't think he's a good film director, and he certainly was the wrong director to make Star Trek. And he said in every one of his fucking interviews, never liked Star Trek growing up. He flat out said it. Why hire him? Why hire him? Would you want a surgeon to open you up and work on your open heart, do your open heart surgery, who said, you know what, never really liked being a surgeon, and I'm not particularly into thoracic medicine or whatever. I don't want to do that. And yet they hired him. And that's another thing. Kevin Feige would never have hired J.J. Abrams to make an Avengers movie if J.J. Abrams said, I was a Justice League fan growing up. Didn't really dig the Avengers. Wasn't a Marvel guy. No, he hired someone like James Gunn, who'd made $2-3 million movies in Super and Slither. And James Gunn probably met with Kevin Feige and went blah, 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 and talked about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what it all meant to him, and probably could rattle off various storylines and comic things. And what Kevin Feige recognizes is it's like, okay, this guy has made $2-3 million movies. Both are unique. He's also written a novel called The Toy Collector. He also worked his way up writing remakes of things like Dawn of the Dead and Scooby-Doo, and he worked for Troma. And he realized that this guy is a filmmaker and a storyteller at heart that has a point of fucking view. That's why he got hired. And that's why we got 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And we got the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special, Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and now James Gunn is running DC Studios. Because he knew what he was doing. And more importantly, he knew what kind of stories to tell. J.J. Abrams has not told an original story in my mind at all. He tried to turn Star Wars into Star Trek. He didn't understand the character of Spock. He did stupid things like make transporters magical. I mean, he turned a Russian actor, had a Russian actor who spoke fluent Russian break the fourth wall to turn Chekhov into a joke by referring to Walter Koenig's ridiculous accent as something we all pop culture, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The whole thing about Chekhov was when you watch the original series, Chekhov, we might laugh at Walter Koenig's bad Russian accent now. I don't think it's bad. I think it's endearing. The whole point is that you don't break the fourth wall. Chekhov was Russian. He was introduced in the second season because it was bad. Believe it or not, the reason they introduced Chekhov in Star Trek was because there was criticism during the Cold War that there are no Russians in the future? And they added the character of Chekhov to the series to show that, talk about being progressive, responding, but they made his character unique. He was like the Young Monkeys, right? The Beatles, whatever. But the joke about Chekhov, which made him endearing, is that he would say that everything great came from Russia. And that was amusing. That was the joke. But what did J.J. Abrams do in Star Trek 09? They have a joke where the ship's computer that apparently would speak millions. I mean, the ship on the Enterprise, the computer is a protocol droid. It speaks a bunch of different languages, but it doesn't understand Chekhov because of his accent. So it's a fourth wall breaking joke, and everyone can laugh at it and go, to me, I wanted to punch the goddamn screen. Because you have a Russian actor who speaks Russian, fluent Russian language speaker, and you make a joke that refers back to Walter Koenig's accent in the original series, completely breaking the fourth wall. But hey, that's what. Oh, wait, what am I talking about? I forget. You get it. You understand. I've said it before. Let's go back to this thing about canon. Again, the reason fans get angry about all of this is not because we're toxic or racist. It's because we are being lied to and we are being told bad stories by people that won't take the time to learn about the stories they're telling. I'll give you an example of how to do it right. Nicholas Meyer, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Nicholas Meyer. Everyone likes Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, right? There's a lot of things that are not very canonical in Star Trek II. But Nicholas Meyer, who wasn't a Star Trek fan, watched Star Trek. He went in and watched Star Trek, talked to Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry said, read Horatio Hornblower. It's all right there. Nicholas Meyer is a smart, astute storyteller. He was a novelist. He was a filmmaker. He grew up in a family of artists. He had a great love of music. But he was able to identify what made Star Trek great and ended up making Star Trek II and injected it with a healthy dose of maritime adventure stories like Horatio Hornblower. But ultimately, it was a story about friendship and sacrifice and mortality and aging. All of these things that you wouldn't think would work in a Star Trek story, but they work beautifully because Nicholas Meyer was a great storyteller. And you know what? Nicholas Meyer didn't go in and go, I'm going to change Star Trek and make it the way I think it should be. I'm going to inject more action adventure into it. I'm going to make it stupider. So, it'll speak to a lower brow individual. I mean, the very act of what J.J. Abrams did to Star Trek is offensive because they decided to make it for people that were less intelligent. Are there people that are less intelligent? Maybe. I don't know. I tend to believe that great storytelling is evident to anybody of any background. Doesn't matter what your economic background is. It doesn't matter what your educational background is. There is truth in storytelling that is self-evident to all people. At least I believe that. But that's what Nicholas Meyer did. So here we go. Canon has a big problem, and the call is coming from inside the house. It's not hard to see how this obsession with canonical fealty has hamstrung Marvel and Lucasfilm, two franchise juggernauts whose every innovation is punished by a fan meltdown. I do not believe that. It is not published by a fan. It is not punished by fan meltdowns. The problem with Marvel is no longer, the MCU is having a problem by not being true to what it was doing, what made it successful in the first place. Marvel fans, I mean, look, we might have complained a little bit, but give me a break. Infinity War and Endgame are two of the finest examples of big budget, balls to the wall, and fantasy entertainment that has ever been made. Now, can you have problems with some of the storylines? Sure. But you know what? For the most part, I mean, it speaks for itself. Look at how many people. I can't get enough. I put those movies on. Those movies, The Godfather 1 and 2 are probably my favorite movies of all time. And whenever they come on, can't stop watching them. I feel the same way about Infinity War and Endgame. I mean, they might be different, but they are fucking wildly entertaining. I love Infinity War and Endgame, and they're the culmination. Look, you might not even love Captain Marvel. And I do think that Captain Marvel is probably a mid-level movie. And it could have been much better than it is, I suppose. But you know what? Put aside your feelings about Brie Larson's portrayal. I love Ben Mendelsohn as Talos. I love Sam Jackson. I love seeing Coulson come back. I like the fact that it's aliens. There's a lot in Jude Law's great. There's a lot in Captain Marvel that is entertaining. And I would give it a solid B. I mean, as a science fiction, fantasy, and horror fan from way back, I liked it the way I liked, The Last Starfighter. Take the nostalgia away. Even when The Last Starfighter came out, it was good. I liked it. It wasn't great. But for the most part, now what's happened in Phase 4, there's a lot of goofiness in Phase 4. I don't think the storytelling has been great. I love that Oscar Isaac played Moon Knight. But I'll tell you, I thought that approach to Moon Knight was certainly after watching it, not the way I would go. I don't think the Moon Knight series they made served the character of Moon Knight well, because they were leading. It was more about the mental illness aspects of it. It didn't even do a very good job commenting on those. They used it as a gimmick. And but anyway, that's as somebody who loves Marvel and has been accused of being a Marvel shill, I think they're in their desire to make the Marvel Universe. Look, here's the funny thing. I'm all for representation, but representation doesn't mean you tell us a bad story. I mean, I really thought it was pretty ballsy of the first Black Panther to touch on things like colonialism. I thought the battle between Killmonger and T'Challa was great. Just like I really liked Sam Wilson grappling with taking on the mantle of Captain America. Some people would say, oh, well, it's race swapping. No, it's not. That's fascinating storytelling. Comes right out of the comics. They're adapting a really important, really interesting story. And I thought the problem with Falcon and Winter Soldier was that they had to change the story midstream because of the pandemic. But if you look at it, you go back, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in that series that I really like. I'll tell you something. I've read the scripts for Secret Invasion. That shit kicks ass. Kicks ass. They've gone back to more Winter Soldier type stuff. I loved it. Now, I don't know if the execution is going to be as good, but yes, I'm not going to say anything that happens, but I'll tell you that the first episode of, you'll know. I will tell you this, from what I've seen, what I've read, and I haven't seen it, unlike other things that I've seen. The first Secret Invasion script, I devoured that in like one gulp. I loved it. I'm like, this is what I love. Now, it's very different from the Secret Wars comics, or Secret Invasion comic series, but man, I loved it. Within the MCU, great follow-up. Really good stuff. I want to see more of that. Tell me a great story. Make sure there is truth in your fiction. Make your fiction truthful, man. That's what I want. Let me get into this paragraph. Canon has a big problem, and the call is coming from inside the house. It's not hard to see how this obsession with canonical fealty has hamstrung Marvel and Lucasfilm, two franchise juggernauts whose every innovation is punished by a fan meltdown. You know what? Fans are not melting down over Andor. You know why? Because there's a fealty to canon. Now, fans might not like the fact, especially fans that prefer the more swashbuckling action-adventure, pulp sci-fi joy of Star Wars. I get that. Andor is not that. Andor is at 180 degrees. Andor is a war story. Andor is a story that could have been made by Jean-Pierre Melville in 1958. I mean, I'm telling you, that's why the fans that aren't on board with Andor is there is no pulp sci-fi to be found in that story. There's no lightsabers. There's no battles. It is entirely 180 degrees, different kind of storytelling. But it extrapolates and leans into the Star Wars universe the way nothing before has. And the show is here's the difference. Star Wars Andor is delving into the side of the Star Wars universe that isn't pleasant at all. And there's not a lot of joy in it. And that's the difference. The way that Chernobyl was a great TV miniseries, not exactly it's not going to put a smile on your face. Andor, however, is doing something that I think that the Star Wars universe, I mean, look, I think people are going to look back at the show, and if you look at social media, even the people like, well, this show's so boring and all that. Yes, but it's canonical, and it's delving into the Star Wars universe the way no one ever has, and you're watching social media come around on it. I'm willing to bet the three episodes of Andor are going to be fucking bangers. Bangers. And people are going to be left breathless like, holy shit, this show has been building up. It's like a great roller coaster. It's been like this. And I understand there's been a lot of people who watch Andor and go, what is this? This is not the Star Wars I know, nor is it supposed to be the Star Wars you know. But you know what Andor is? It's exactly the fiction they wanted it to be. It is uncompromised, and it is telling you the story of the creators that the Gilroy boys, Tony Gilroy, Dan Gilroy, and their brother John, they set out to do something totally different and innovative in the Star Wars universe that we'd never seen before, and they are succeeding admirably, and they did not break canon. If anything, they have leaned into the Star Wars universe the way even George Lucas hasn't. Because even George Lucas, I know this is going to sound weird to say, and it might strain my credibility with all of you. George Lucas does not know as much about the Star Wars universe as we as Star Wars fans know. Simply because the Star Wars universe has, by his own design, he created something that has flourished and grown. And there are things about Star Wars, George, like if you were to ask George Lucas certain things about the Star Wars universe, he couldn't answer them. The same is true of, if I were to ask, I use this as an example, if I were to ask Patrick Stewart, what happened when the Enterprise C went back in time to the Battle of Narendra 3? And what was the Klingon-Romulan geopolitical situation because of that? And how did that change history? Patrick Stewart would look at me like I don't know shit. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? He wouldn't know. Would you hold that against him? No, he's an actor reading words on a script. The people that make these fictional universes do not live in them the way that we do. So, anyway, great creators do, though, like the Gilroy boys. All right. When storytellers are held hostage by their own audiences, again, storytellers are not held hostage by their audiences. Storytellers are held hostage by their inability to tell truthful stories in the fictitious universes they've chosen to work within. Their audience, the audience of fans, When storytellers are held hostage by their own audiences, it undermines their ability to do what artists do best: explore, revise, and play. No, it does not do that. But if you have chosen to explore and revise and play in an existing canonical universe, the audience is not, as a matter of fact, the audience isn't holding you hostage. The audience is eagerly awaiting with bated breath to see what you come up with, and they go into it wanting to love it. We go into every one of these shows, every Star Wars show that comes out, every Star Trek movie, every Lord of the Rings thing, anything that comes out, we're first in fucking line. We want to love. And then you know what happens? Creators let us down. They let us down, man. And we sit there in a theater or in front of our TV or holding a book going, what the fuck is this shit? How is it that I know more than the creator of this show? How do I know more? I'll tell you something. I'll tell you a sad story. Tell you a sad story about Star Trek. Sad story. So here's the thing about it. So like Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. I had got my hands on the original Harv Bennett. Harv Bennett came on board as the producer of Star Trek after the motion picture, produced Star Trek 2, produced and co-wrote Star Trek 3. Or actually, maybe he wrote the whole thing. His treatment was called Star Trek Return to Genesis. Really good. I really liked it. It was very serious, very adult. The Vulcans wanted to secede from the Federation because they were horrified by the Genesis device. So some of it took place on Vulcan was in the midst of very illogical protests, but it was horrible. To them, what the hell? The Federation had been developing in secret this horrible, terrible weapon. And the storyline was just far more adult and far more sprawling. But in the story, it was the Romulans who had snuck across or had gone to the Mutara Nebula to examine the Genesis planet. And when they set up, and by the way, as we all know from Balance of Terror, the very first episode with the Romulans from the 66-67 season of the original series, the Romulans were shown their ship in the episode Balance of Terror, one of the great original Star Trek episodes, by the way. If you've never seen an original Star Trek episode, or you haven't seen much Star Trek at all, go and watch. Your pop culture understanding of the bridge crew of the Enterprise will carry you through. Go watch Balance of Terror. It is a fantastic episode of television, one of the great episodes of Star Trek. And take particular notice of how the villains are portrayed in that episode. Masterclass of writing. Anyway, so in the movie, in Star Trek 3, the Romulans have gone to the Genesis planet in a bird of prey. A Romulan bird of prey. Because as we saw in Balance of Terror, they have big birds of prey painted on the bottoms of their starships, which is pretty cool, right? We hadn't seen that before. That was a Romulan thing. So when I finally went and saw Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, it was it was directed by Leonard Nimoy. And I know this is going to sound crazy to say, but actors are the people that know the least about the franchises that they're appearing in, because they do not see them. They don't understand the bigger, wider universe. They're actors reading a page. They're not reading novels. They're not looking at tech manuals. They're not reading online chat boards and delving into what warp speeds really are and star dates. Actors know the least about the canon of the franchises they work in than anyone. It seems strange, but it's true, because they act and they move on to the next thing. Trust me, they're not reading the Star Trek maps or anything like that. So when I saw Star Trek 3, they changed, and I'm sure either Leonard Nimoy or somebody at the studio said, yeah, why don't we just make it the Klingons? And why? It could have been a production issue, because they still had Klingon uniforms from Star Trek the Motion Picture, and they frequently reused assets they had at the studio level. For whatever reason, they changed the Romulans, which would have been the way the Romulans were depicted. Star Trek 3, the way it was originally conceived by Harv Bennett, was a much more adult movie. The final movie that's finished, because it was Leonard Nimoy's first at-bat as director, is very much more of a, let's call it, less adult, more pulpy sci-fi action adventure. More along the lines of what Leonard Nimoy thought he had been in since 1966. So you get to the Klingon bird of prey. Now, anyone worth their salt, and me as a Star Trek canonista, I'm like, God damn it. The Klingons don't have bird of preys. But here's what happened. A theory. I've never seen anyone speak about this, but when they changed it to the Klingons, no one bothered to change it. It's like, oh, it's a Klingon bird of prey because that sounds cool. I'm sure there was some poor, I've never heard anyone from ILM say this, but if one of the ILM vets could one day confirm, I'd love to hear this confirmed. They're like, somebody at ILM was like, so we're going to build this model. We're going to build a this Klingon ship, and it's called a bird of prey. It's painted like a bird of prey, even though that was a Romulan thing. Well, not anymore. And as the canonista that I am, when I first started seeing pictures of the Klingon bird of prey and seeing it, now I understand. I mean, I get it, but this is when Star Trek started showing cracks. This is when Star Trek really started to move away. And people would say to me, well, Rob, in Star Trek the Motion Picture, the Klingons don't look like they look on TV. Now, here's another thing I'm going to talk about canon. There is production issues that you have to adhere to, or you have to extrapolate upon. Now, in the Federation, when they call us the Federation, in the Federation you have Tellarites, you have Vulcans, you have the Andorians. And if you had met a bunch of human beings in a Federation starship, and then you met the crew of the Intrepid before it was destroyed by a giant space amoeba that was full of Vulcans, would you think that everybody from the Federation had pointed ears? Or what if you met the Andorians? Would they all be white-haired beings with blue skin? So when I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture and you see a different race of Klingons, I didn't sit there and go, oh, they've changed the Klingons. I'm like, that's interesting. Now, in my mind, that does not break canon. And why does it not break canon? Because in the real world, you can extrapolate the idea that and John Ford ran with it in his book, The Final Reflection. They called it for a while the Imperial Klingon race. Like the Klingons that were seen in Star Trek the Motion Picture actually came from the Klingon homeworld, from Kronos. And that's what they look like. And that the Klingons that were there were theories, why did they look more human? Well, because as they got closer to Federation space, people there was intermarriage or whatever, say what you want. Believe it or not, it didn't break canon, though, because there are different races within the Klingon Empire. And what's interesting is we've never seen it depicted that way, but I would say in my mind, even in 1979 when I was 12, I'm like, that's interesting. That didn't break canon. However, a Klingon bird of prey, that was a fucking mistake that nobody fixed. And then suddenly we have to then go, oh, how do we incorporate this? And as we are Star Trek fans were wont to do, we had to figure out ways to incorporate it into our headcanon. I've never liked the fact it was a Klingon bird of prey because it was supposed to be, having read the original treatment for the movie, it was supposed to be a Romulan bird of prey, but nobody thought to change it. Somebody at ILM did. But Leonard Nimoy is like, what would do? I'm sure someone brought it up to me. He's like, what difference does it make? Why can't the Klingons have a bird of prey? But it would have been much cooler if the Klingons had their own Klingon thing rather than something that went against canon and took away from something the Romulans had. That's just my thought process, leading you to know where I'm at with that. But hang on. Obsession with canonical fealty has hamstrung Marvel and Lucasfilm, two franchise juggernauts. I just want to be clear. Canonical fealty does not hamstring Marvel and DC. Canonical fealty is something, it's part of the lore, it's part of the universe. It's what makes your IP unique. That canon is what makes your fictional universe fun to revisit, whether it's in video games or novels or comics or TV or movies. That's what makes your canon unique. Then everything would have the same fucking canon. And when you break canon, you ruin the uniqueness of your own fictional universe. And when creators do that, what that says to the fan base is you people don't care enough to pay attention to the very fictional universe you expect us to pay our good money to come be in again, because we love it. What it is, it's a slap in the face. It's like when you're cheating on your girlfriend and she knows you're cheating on her and you lie to her face. That's what they're doing to us. They're lying to our faces and we get angry. We get angry. And rightfully so. Rightfully so. I don't like it when people lie to me about my fictional universes. Tell me the goddamn truth about my fictional universes and I will not get mad. It's as simple as that. And the problem is, it's not even that you're lying to me. It's that you're too stupid to know. You haven't done the fucking work. And that's when we get mad. That's when fans get mad. Why is R2-D2 the hero of 6 previous movies under a fucking tarp during Force Awakens? Why isn't he front and center? Because of fucking BB-8? Since when did BB-8 suddenly be better than R2-D2? Oh, I know. When Bad Robot wants to get a little of that merchandising money. But you know what? I mean, come on. That's why people get angry. I mean, the funny thing is, I don't care what you say. R2-D2 is, was, and always will be way cooler than BB-8 ever could be. Just because he can roll around on the fucking sand doesn't make him some goddamn hero. You know what I'm saying? Who's with me? All of you are. Anybody watching this now, you're all with me. All of you are. I know it. I know you're with me, damn it. Anyway, let me finish this paragraph. By the way, I hope you understand we're supposed to be having fun here. This is not me being unhinged and crazy. It's me having a good time. It's me, but I believe all I'm saying, god damn it. When storytellers are held hostage by their own audiences, it undermines their ability to do what artists do best. Explore, revise, play. If you want to explore, revise, play, don't work in someone else's universe. Create your own fucking IP that hopefully I will fall in love with. This is the problem with storytelling in the age of the mega franchise. All too often, the impulses of abiding canon conflict with the impulses of making art. Oh, here it comes. The one example you're always going to trot out. As Ron Moore, a longtime Star Trek writer who later rebooted Battlestar Galactica, put it, it's frustrating to be in the writer's room and tossing out stories than having to stop yourself and go, does this work? Does this violate continuity? And having to call people and check encyclopedias and look up information. You want to have it all in your head and just play. The Trek universe has got to the point where you can't play anymore. I disagree with you, Ron. I've interviewed you for hours on end, and you know I love you. But and you're not wrong about this. But you know what? The thing is, that's why Star Trek should move forward. You know, the reason that Next Generation did not always have canonical fealty to what had come before, but you know what? You were moving forward. You were almost 100 years in the future with Next Generation. So that future you were creating your own canon, which made sometimes you had to look back, but look, Ron, you more than anyone redefined the Klingons for the modern age and gave them things that we had no idea about. And so you created, when it came to the Klingons, more canonical information than anybody. And I thought you did a good job. The idea is that Star Trek has now gone back in time with Discovery, with Strange New Worlds, and it's telling stories that completely change and violate what had come before. And they're maddening. And the stories, by the way, if they were great stories, I don't think people would care, but they're not. They're not great stories. They're stories that have been led by their messaging as told to us by the very people making it. You know, and I'm like, wait a minute, messaging? Star Trek had messaging built into it. You know, you didn't have to literally take the latest whatever somebody said in print and turn it into a story. But anyway, how can storytellers possibly play or progress under the weight of all of that baggage and still please today's demanding audiences too? Some mega franchises have found a solution where canon isn't a restriction, but rather a foundation. If fans won't accept stories where canon makes less sense, then by God, these shows will bring the canon to make more sense. Consider Strange New Worlds, Paramount Plus's sensational Star Trek prequel set during the captaincy of Christopher Pike, who preceded Captain Kirk aboard the Enterprise. Fans of the original series no doubt remember the landmark 2-part episode The Menagerie, which shocked viewers when Spock abducted his former commander Captain Pike install the Enterprise, risking his life and career to transport a paralyzed Pike to a forbidden planet. It's a fantastic episode. It's 2 fantastic episodes, but it lacks a backstory. Just what sort of bond existed between these 2 men that drove rule-following Spock to steal Starfleet's flagship? Okay. First of all, the backstory. Remember, the cage that the menagerie is, they took the original failed pilot of Star Trek, the cage, and they turned it into the backstory for the current iteration of Star Trek. That's why it's so brilliant. The whole point is you learn about our Spock by watching how he interacted with our characters, meaning Kirk, McCoy, by getting his backstory filled in. The backstory, all you need to know about the backstory of Spock is in the menagerie and his reactions. And what was it all about? All of it. He took a man who he deeply respected and indeed loved. Remember, here's something. Remember, Star Trek creators, Vulcans have emotions. They are as passionate as any other beings in the universe. They have just learned through their discipline of philosophy and belief how to control them and use their mental faculties to control their emotions. So what happened to Pike, a man who Spock served under for over 11 years, was friends with, was probably somebody that meant more to him, even more than James Kirk, because he knew James Kirk for less time. What happened to Pike to have that kind of an intellect, a man, a being, a traveler of the universe, to have that kind of a soul locked away in that goddamn wheelchair? Spock knew, because he is compassionate and loving and caring, he knew that only him, he was the only man in the universe that understood that he alone knew what Talos 4 was, he knew what the Talosians could do, and he knew that Captain Pike did not deserve to spend the rest of his days the way he had. And the only people that could give him respite from his situation were the Talosians. So everything that Spock did was methodical, logical, and it was indeed emotional. But you know what? It was done to make the universe a better place, if only for one man. And that was wonderful about that story. And what did the people who made Strange New Worlds lean into? They had to give us backstory on Discovery, actually, because in that particular episode, there's a sound effect and it's the wind blowing through these flowers, and we see Spock be a little emotional. He stops these flowers from the wind blowing, and the sound stops, and Spock smiles. Well, what did they do in Discovery? Oh, they took that smile. Oh, it's a blooper. Let's turn it into something. Let's turn that smile into a bunch of backstory. Again, it's like making Chekhov in Star Trek 09. This is the thinking. Rather, we're going to key on that. Look at how clever we are. We're going to explain why Spock smiled. No, man, that's not clever. That was just because they hadn't defined Spock. And by the way, it was from the rejected pilot anyway, even though it was in Menagerie. Still, you guys were trying to be too cool for school. And then you decided to make Spock not fully formed and turn him into a generic fucking TV character. But anyway, that's just a rant. Strange New Worlds, a prequel whose major thematic concerns include Pike's anxiety after foreseeing his own grim fate, ripped off from Margaret Wanderer Bonanno's book Burning Dreams, as well as his deep and meaningful friendship with Spock. In the Season 1 finale, after Spock intuits that Pike has saved his life through some alternate universe Hui, Spock says, "I believe I may owe you a debt of gratitude." This scene continues with a poignant conversation about how much these two men mean to one another, but for devoted fans, it runs a deeper level. So this is why Spock steals the Enterprise, because he owes Pike his life, and he'd do anything to save a beloved friend. Suddenly, everything that lies ahead in the canonical timeline makes that much more sense. No, it doesn't. We knew that in 1966. It was apparent in the Menagerie episodes 1 and 2. All they did was they went back to something. Look, if Strange New Worlds was a great TV show, they wouldn't have any reason to go back and reflect on past Star Trek episodes. But they do. all the time, and they do it badly. Look at the end of the first season of Strange New Worlds. They pick and choose Balance of Terror, which, by the way, makes no sense in the context they're using it. And what do? The most interesting thing about that episode was our look into the Romulan culture, and they fuck it up. Why? Because Akiva Goldsman is not that great of a writer, especially when it comes to science fiction. He is not the man. Look at anything. When has Akiva Goldsman ever written anything good that was sci-fi related? Ever. Like, look, I mean, he didn't, never. And he's not the guy to write Star Trek. He understands Star Trek on a very cursory level. It's a pulp sci-fi show. If it were him, Akiva Goldsman would never have made Andor. And you know what? What I wanted from Strange New Worlds was a cross between something like that. Give me a really serious, very interesting, very thought-provoking science fiction show instead of ripping off female science fiction writers, which you do all the time. But anyway, you know, and then this goes on to Lord of the Rings, which let's just read this article a little bit more, and then I'll just get back to you guys. Over on Prime Video, Rings of Power follows a similar model, where J.R.R. Tolkien's source material is narratively thin, consisting largely of battles and successions. Rings of Power showrunners have grafted connective tissue onto this sparse scaffolding, shading in the thoughts, feelings, and choices that propel familiar characters to each predetermined plot point. We know where these characters are going, but if there's one thing Tolkienites understand, it's that the journey that shapes and changes us. It is the journey that shapes and changes us, not the destination. Where Tolkien gave us only the destination, Rings of Power fills the journey. Take Lord Elrond example. How did he become such a legendary statesman, able to build consensus between mortal and immortal races? Rings of Power imagined his years as a rookie diplomat, building out a formative and often touching friendship with the dwarven Prince Durin IV. As Strange New Worlds accomplishes with Spock, suddenly Elrond's canonical future makes more sense. To be clear, the Star Trek and Lord of the Rings fandoms are not without their own share of bad behavior, and for some fans, even enlarging the canon is a bridge too far. But Gandalf wasn't in Middle-earth during the Second Age, these persnickety purists argue. Okay, why is that a persnickety? You're not a persnickety purist by saying he wasn't in the Second Age. He wasn't. J.R.R. Tolkien flat out said that. You know? So, it's not persnickety. So when someone tries to show you that if Gandalf does show up in the Second Age, you're like, why are you are lying to us about our fiction. Why are you doing that? And I'll tell you why. They're not doing it because they're trying to tell you a great story. This article is trying to say, no, in the case of both Rings of Power and Strange New Worlds, the creators that have taken on these roles are not taking on these roles because they wanted to do it. They're taking on these roles because it's a money job. And there's nothing wrong with making money. I have no problem with making money. But you know what? They didn't love these franchises. I mean, everyone can say, I love Lord of the Rings. I'd love to work on a show. But they didn't even spend the kind of money. They didn't even, Amazon, the whole reason that Lord of the Rings is being made is because they wanted to make some big fat money, because they look at the Lord of the Rings movies, even the Hobbit movies that I'm iffy on, made close to $1 billion each. That's a $6 billion entertainment franchise that endures to this day. The reason that people bought Rings of Power was to make money. You know, and maybe there wasn't like a creative, if you had like an Aaron Sorkin or a Vince Gilligan, or take your pick, whoever or a Shonda Rhimes. Take Shonda Rhimes, because it would be make more sense in this day and age. Shonda Rhimes goes to fucking Amazon and says, you know what? I know I've got a deal at Netflix, but they're letting me do this one thing. I love Lord of the Rings. I'm passionate about Tolkien. I want to make this show. I know how to make this show. Here's what I would do with the Second Age of Middle-earth, and this is what I want. And Amazon, I want you to spend almost $500 million getting me the rights because I'm Shonda fucking Rhimes and I want to make Lord of the Rings. That would be something I would watch and get excited about and be like, if you have a passionate creator. Now, that doesn't mean Shonda Rhimes wouldn't fuck it up. But if you had a passionate creator who went in there, guns blazing, saying, I want to make this. And that always doesn't necessarily mean that they're always going to succeed. But I would much rather have that kind of passion. Somebody that had fealty to Tolkien, and somebody that would not get rid of Tolkien scholars if they worked on the show or something like that. Then I would get excited. Same thing is true of Star Trek. The people at Bad Robot and the people at Secret Hideout, I'll tell you something. Do you know why I love Star Trek Picard Season 3? Because none of the people that are in charge of Star Trek cared enough about it to do it themselves. They allowed Terry Matalas, already proven, he came on board, worked underneath Brandon Braga on Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Enterprise. They gave a creator who basically snuck in the door, don't blame him for Season 2 of Picard, he came in and did what he wanted. He took Star Trek by the reins and he goes, you know what? I want to turn this back into what we all loved about Star Trek. What I knew people loved about Star Trek because I used to work on Star Trek. And he was left alone to do it. I mean, we never had that. We never had that. We had that in Brian Fuller. Were all of his choices perfect? No. But he was dismissed because of how much things were costing. Costs, when you're trying to make a new TV show, you have to amortize those costs. The reason Star Trek Picard Season 3 is so great is because you had a person who loved Star Trek making it. That's it. Somebody who understood Star Trek, somebody who reached into Star Trek's multiple, the Berman era of Trek, all the way back to Encounter at Farpoint, all the way through Enterprise, all the good, the bad. He took the best of the Berman era of Trek and gave us a full, which is, by the way, which is ironic because that's what people wanted from Star Trek Picard from the beginning. I mean, look, honestly, I think they should call Star Trek Picard Season 3 Star Trek The Next Generation Requiem. That's what they should call it. Star Trek The Next Generation Requiem. That's what I'm going to call Picard Season 3 from now on. Star Trek The Next Generation Requiem. Anyway, where canon-obsessed fans might see a limitation, any good storyteller would see a tantalizing mystery. Tolkien himself often amended and expanded his own work, so why shouldn't Rings of Power take some creative liberties? Because they're not Tolkien. Especially with the author's gray areas. Because they're not J.R.R. Tolkien? Isn't it more fun to think about what could be true rather than what must be true? Yes, but I'll tell you something. Again, these people, you have to have a fealty to Tolkien. If you want to fill in something, look at fucking Andor. Andor was not a show going, I'm Tony Gilroy, and I'm an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, and let's see, I think I'm going to just turn Star Wars into something I'd rather have it be rather than what it really is. I mean, if anything, Tony Gilroy turned the wars of Star Wars more into the wars of it all than we've ever seen before. And the thing is, it has more to say about us as a people, Star Wars Andor, than anything. I mean, the Mandalorian's different. What they're trying to do with Mandalorian, what Favreau and Filoni are doing is different, but also equally valid to me. Equally valid. The Mandalorian especially. They're leaning into canon. They're leaning into the canon that Dave Filoni extrapolated on, so that's a different story. I mean, Book of Boba Fett did too. It just did so unsuccessfully. It was just, you can still have people that love canon that tell bad stories. And Andor doesn't break canon. Andor is just giving you something. I never would have thought a Star Wars show could be as relevant to our world today as Andor is, especially as we see the rise of power mongers and the government, where democracies, we're watching the slow demise of democracy. We're certainly watching it at home, and we're watching it around the world. And Andor is showing us living today, what the scary results of losing a democracy can wind up being. That's what Andor's about. That's what they have done, what great science fiction does. Andor is a cautionary tale about our world today. I never thought I'd get that in Star Wars, and they're doing it within canonical terms. That's fucking amazing. I only wish Star Trek could do the same thing. Now I'm going to get back to our article here, and this is when I'm back with her. When we love stories, we want them to make sense, to have consistent internal logic, to meet the sky-high expectations that our devotion has placed upon them. But canon isn't purely good by definition, and sometimes it restricts good storytelling. For a story to endure and expand decade after decade, as all of these mega franchises have, it must be adaptive and reactive. That's the very soul of adaptation. As Tolkien himself said of his own legendarium, it must leave room for other minds and hands. Isn't it exciting to consider that we still don't know everything about these characters and their worlds all this time later? These fictional sandboxes are endlessly generative. It's part of why we can't get enough of them. In the age of corporatized canon, perhaps wanting these storytellers to tear up the rulebook is too much to ask. But as radical as this yes-and approach to canon may seem, it's really just a shade of what's possible. Ron Moore offers a compelling roadmap for what might look like Ron Moore offers a compelling roadmap for what it might look like to no longer be straitjacketed by canon. This was version 1 of Trek. Love it, celebrate it, watch it forever if that is your cup of tea. Go ahead. Let's have version 2. Let's have another Starship Enterprise with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and let's tell a different version of the events. Look at Shakespeare. How many versions of Cleopatra can the world stand? As many as you can think of. Let's just do a different take on it and get energy out of it and not worry about all the backstories. You want Trek to be fun, so make it fun. When it comes to canon, it's true what they say. If you love something, set it free. Now, I think she's doing two different things here. I totally agree. Version 1 of Star Trek, give us version 2 of Star Trek. Ron Moore already did it. If you want to look at what to do with our franchises, what he did with Battlestar Galactica, while not perfect, is incredible. First of all, Battlestar Galactica was not the greatest show in the world. The original. Talk about the original 78 Battlestar Galactica. It was not the greatest show in the world. Ron Moore took all the really interesting concepts in Battlestar Galactica and plus them and made it better in every way, shape, and form. I know there were people that are like, well, you turned Starbuck into a girl. Yeah, and she's a way better character than Dirk Benedict Starbuck ever was. Not to take away from Dirk Benedict, but you know what Ron Moore did? Ron Moore retold the story of Battlestar Galactica. It was still recognizable. The Galactica looked like the Galactica. It was just cool, not like the old Galactica wasn't. But he kept even the theme. He worked it all in there. The Battlestar Galactica reimagining was a very clever and very smart reimagining of an IP that left the original alone, even though there was interesting ties. I agree 100% about that. The problem that I have is when these creators are trying to tell me I'm watching... the prequel, Star Trek Discovery, has nothing to do with the original series. They try and make it have something. It doesn't. It doesn't look or feel like Star Trek at all. There's nothing about Star Trek Discovery that feels Star Trek to me at all. And yet they're trying to tell me, talk about gaslighting. To me, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Picard it takes place afterwards, and Prodigy and Lower Decks take place. They're different, but Star Trek Discovery is the ultimate example of being gaslit by a bunch of fucking doofs. Doofs that got the job working on Star Trek TV shows. It's so lame. And by the way, they even took it and bastardized what it was supposed to be in the first place. They took Brian Fuller's original conception, and I understand Brian, by the way, was not infallible. Those new Klingons, they were mostly his idea. But they could have leaned in more to the Imperial Klingon race and shown us something we hadn't known before. But, it's complicated, but what they ended up going with, just not that good. Star Trek Discovery, changing everything around, turning it into something that isn't great. Anyway, you know what I want to do? I want to put this article, I hope I didn't just zotz this article. I want to put this article in the live chat so you can read it. And Adrienne Westenfeld, you know what? I like your article, but I just disagree with you. And I hope you don't hate me for it. Now, since I finished the article, let me go in and Darth Plato, our friend Darth Plato says, I'm not saying you're wrong per se, but I have a question. Is the MCU the most successful franchise because it has made the most money? Was the Dutch East India Company the most successful company because it was the wealthiest, adjusted for inflation? No. They just did the best job at telling stories. I mean, let's face it. If you look at Iron Man 1, the first MCU movie, it's a great comic book movie, but it's also a great story. And why is it a great story? Because it starts small. It's the story of a great fun character, Tony Stark, billionaire, cool guy, who has a change of heart after he realizes what the work that his company has been doing has done to the world. And if you look at it now, it's a small story. And he ends up fighting for the soul of his company. And through doing that, I mean, obviously he battles with Obadiah Stane, his former mentor, who's stolen technology from him. And it's a fairly intimate story. But the reason that the MCU worked so well, especially in the first 3 phases, is because it was about the people. It wasn't like Steve Rogers was Steve Rogers before he was Captain America. He became Captain America, but you thought of these characters, I mean, Thor is Thor because that's who he is, Thor Odin's son. But the great thing about the MCU and the reason the heart of the MCU is because it gave you 3 characters that you liked. Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, and Thor. That's how, if those characters, if you didn't like and it gave you Sam Jackson as Nick Fury. And if you didn't like those characters, the MCU wouldn't have worked. And that's at the heart of any great IP or any great, call it a world, great characters and great stories. And that's why the MCU is successful. The reason it made lots of money is because it gave us great characters and great stories. The MCU, if they had made all these movies and they didn't make as much, I mean, they wouldn't have been made if the box office didn't exist. But say they did, people would still love these stories. Look, The Shawshank Redemption didn't make money at the box office. It's a great fucking movie. Not only that, it changed the race of one of its main characters. Red was a white Irish dude in the book, but they turned him into Morgan Freeman. I mean, no one would ever get mad about race swapping the character in the movie. Why? Because no one can even envision, if you haven't read the original story, Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, which appears in Stephen King's Different Seasons from 1982, if you'd never read the story, you would never even think about that. You can never imagine anyone else but Morgan Freeman in that role. Why? Because it was great. It was great. Again, nobody cares. Nobody cares about race, gender, religion. Nobody gives a shit if you get a great story with great characters. Nobody harps on the fact now it's becoming a thing. I mean, the reason people are mad about it, why fans get mad about it, is because it shows a fundamental, look, lead with the story. But nowadays it seems like, and I understand, marginalized voices, everybody, we haven't had enough. And by the way, the more diverse, if our diversity on this planet is reflected in our storytelling, it's only a great thing. The problem is, it suddenly overshadows the characters in the story. If your story and characters are great, I mean, and I give you John Boyega in the Star Wars sequels. He was done dirty. He was a character that they couldn't figure out their own premise. They didn't know what to do. A stormtrooper with a conscience. You know who could have done something with that? Tony Gilroy. If Tony Gilroy was in charge of, I can't even imagine what we would have had if they made those 3 Star Wars films. But the problem is, we're not getting great stories and great characters. We're getting messages and agendas that take the place of great storytelling. And the problem is, if the stories were great and the characters were great, nobody would care. They wouldn't care. But no one's leading with that anymore. And it's like, wait a minute, I love these things because I want a great character and a great story. You know, Star Trek had all kinds of different characters. You had strong women characters. You had strong minority characters. Nobody ever thought to themselves, if the characters are great, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Give me a story. I don't care if you tell me a story about, somebody, LGBTQ, black, white, straight, religious. It doesn't matter. A character can have all those traits. Just give me a great story and a great character. I mean, hell, man. You know what? I think about, like, Footloose. You know, they make John Lithgow's character. Like, he's this firebrand Christian preacher. No, you can't dance. In this town, we don't dance. Ren McCormick comes and everyone, the kids dance. But you know what? They don't dance because kids lost their lives. And at the end of the day, John Lithgow was a great foil. He started out as a villain, and he's somebody who becomes sympathetic, and then he realizes it's time to give up the fear. And even John Lithgow in Footloose, you don't like him at first, but you end up liking him. You like this preacher man who so often preachers and religious men of the cloth, women of the cloth are not treated well in our media. But in the case like that, you sympathize and respect him. He's a great character. I have no idea why Footloose just popped into my brain and I used John Lithgow's character for Footloose. This is a weird show, man. It's a weird show. I just want to talk about canon. But, hey. And you know what? Star Trek always did a really interesting job from an allegorical perspective of looking into all of these issues of the day in interesting ways. And that's what great storytelling does. So Darth Plato goes on to say, your surgeon example was funny. It reminds me of a story. When Reagan was shot, he was wheeled into the operating room. Reagan looked around the room at the several doctors waiting to operate on him, and Reagan said, I sure hope none of you are Democrats. Look, you know what? That's why people love Reagan. I mean, love his policies or not. Reagan was a man who understood what it meant to be a human being. And that is a perfect example. I mean, that's actually, you know what, Darth Plato? That is a tremendous example. Thank you. Well done. Paul in Long Beach says, Dear Rob, me, Mikey, and Tom would ask you to please stop using the term headcanon. We do not think it means what you think it means. Thank you. Well, Paul. Yes, it's interesting. The difference is a headcanon doesn't shoot. It just takes things in. That's the difference. Let's see. There's more people. I think, where was I? I got to find out where I was on Super Chats. No, wait, I'm way back here. John Wellbacker says, I think bad movies in a canon universe can be made better with future context. Look at the prequel trilogy era, or how much The Dark World and Age of Ultron in the MCU now matter to good stories. I think that's true. I agree with you. I think they can be made better. Although I always loved Age of Ultron, and it's just aged better. I always liked it. I'm an Ultron fan. But John, I think you're absolutely right about that. It's very true. Jaimin D says, and by the way, Andor. I mean, my God, Andor's making Rogue One better. It's making Star Wars better. It's making everything better. Jaimin D says, hey, Rob, I was wondering if you've ever seen Death Takes a Holiday with Frederick March. It has one of the scariest introductions of death, but by the end, I was rooting for him. I have seen Death Takes a Holiday. I haven't seen that in ages. But Death Takes a Holiday, you're absolutely right. But what's great about Death Takes a Holiday is that they establish death as death. He has to be death before you can humanize him or it. But yes, and I'm sure, as a matter of fact, that Death Takes a Holiday was in Neil Gaiman. It influenced the Sandman for sure. You know what? I want to know, what year was Death Takes a Holiday? Let's see. 1934. I thought it was 30s. So Death Takes a Holiday was made in 1934, and it is, and just the Wikipedia entry says that this is really interesting. It's a pre-code movie. So for those who don't know, back in the 30s, before the Hays Code took effect, they got away with a lot of shit movies back in the day, in terms of being able to deal with. I mean, it wasn't as overt today, obviously, but they got away with a lot of stuff. And that's why they had the Hays Code, because the moralists of the country are like, these movies are becoming they're too degenerates. And they did pre-Hays Code films are really interesting. So yeah, 1934. You should check it out. You know what? I don't own Death Takes a Holiday, and I haven't seen it in ages. And maybe I I need to get this. So in Death Takes a Holiday, it's great. It's very Neil Gaiman-esque. Death, the way I remember it is, it's like, why do people think I'm so bad? I don't understand. And he takes mortal form and goes to live amongst men to try and understand why people don't like death. And it's a great movie, and it's definitely worth seeing. Jaimin D says, you mean to say men and women didn't fantasize about being alone with Shannon Tweed, Kari Werher, or Angie Everhart, or Tia Carrera? Come on now. I'd go with Relic Hunter on any adventure if I can. Yeah, you know what's really weird? I don't understand why it is that we want to get rid of, like we want to pretend like the male gaze doesn't exist. Like, have you watched TikTok videos? I mean, it's so, we want to live in a world where on one hand, academia is trying to say the male gaze is terrible. And yet on the other hand, you have women all over the world depending on the male gaze to watch your TikTok videos. It's such a, we live in such a weird world. You know what? Makes me want to go back and watch Al Pacino's speech at the end of, look, but don't touch. Touch, but don't taste. I mean, to deny, we should be leaning into human biology and refining it, making sure that, look, let's be more respectful of one another's more personal space, but let's develop eroticism. If anything, let's develop the male gaze. Let's stop males from being douchebags. Like you read about what Harvey Weinstein did to these women. I mean, my God, dude. You'd think with your power, you could be some suave, debonair dude, but you would bring these actresses up to your hotel room and you would act like a Neanderthal. I mean, here's a guy that could wield his power, but no. He had to be, what an unrefined oaf or ogre that man was. Truly, he was like a troll that lived under the bridge, that victimized women. It's so disappointing for somebody that really did so much for cinema to find out that he was such a really hideous human being. And it's gross. It's so gross. That's the kind of thing we have to fight against. But the male gaze, let's refine it so the male gaze doesn't lead to Harvey Weinstein's. And I think let's celebrate. Why shouldn't we celebrate attraction we have for one another? Do we want to live in a world? Like, I don't want to live in a world where I don't see beauty and I don't see women and men. I mean, let's face it. I see a male form or a male figure as somebody that's striking in their appearance. I'm very comfortable. I have no problem admitting that I see men that I find beautiful, handsome, wish I looked like them, striking. I mean, I'm straight, but that doesn't mean I can't look at a man and find tremendous beauty and power in the male form. What's wrong with that? I feel the same way about women as well. And I think we need to celebrate this, not get away from it. We just need to know how to control it and make sure it doesn't become a problem. I don't want to live in a world that has no lust, that has no eroticism, that the human beings aren't thirsty for one another. Who wants to live in that world? Gross. Kevin Carmack says, society has lost its sense of curiosity, which is inimical to I think I got that right, to imagination. Stories are now in service of the message instead of the other way around. They're more concerned about content than art. Kevin, well said. You definitely park your shuttlecraft in our shuttle bay. I agree. But here's what's so weird about that. Why do people think they're the messengers? That's what I don't understand. I listen to people like, obviously, the ideas of people being considered, people being treated equally within society and under the law. These are all things that we should aspire to. Who wants to live in a world where people are not treated equally? I mean, if you look at what's going on, whether it's in Ethiopia, thank God, let's hear it for the civil war that was raging there is being put to bed. Let's hope it sticks. Let's see that kind of thing happen, or let's hope that what's been going on in Ukraine will come to an end. But I totally agree with you. Content, art should be what's important. And again, art is where truth can be seen the most. The way that an image can be stirring, whether it's a painting or whether it's a photograph or a sculpture or or a video installation, whatever. I mean, and the idea and great storytelling, you can never lead. A great story is never great if you lead with a message. The message is inherent. That's what storytelling is all about. The message itself, the whole point of telling a story is to convey something to another human being within the context of the story. You don't come out and go, let me tell you this great story about inclusion or equity or this great story about anti-war message, and then tell the story. You tell the story knowing the message that you want to convey is in that story. That's why you choose to tell the story that you tell. That's what stories are great for. Fry Minis says, I just finished All Quiet on the Western Front because of how you talked about it on the John Campea show. Holy crap. Wow. Brutal. Amazing soundtrack. Thanks, Rob. Fry Minis. Most of the time, I will never steer you wrong. That movie's incredible. And by the way, the soundtrack is not what you would expect, but man, is it effective. Wow. And again, that is great. That is great storytelling. For those of you who don't know what Fry Minis is talking about, there is a new version. The first one was like 1930, I think, of All Quiet on the Western Front, a war film about World War I. That is Germany's official entry into the Academy Awards this year. It is on Netflix. It might be the best movie that Netflix has ever put on their platform. It's incredible. Brutal, difficult to watch, but incredible. And I highly, highly recommend it. Fry Minis, I'm glad you checked it out. Michael Preston says, hey, Rob, now that Zaslav is in charge, do you really think there will be a Man of Steel 2, maybe even a JLA 2, or has that train left the station? Be well. No, I absolutely think we're getting a Henry Cavill Superman movie. I think it's going to be a different kind of a Superman movie. Look, I think I'm ultimately, I really enjoy Zack Snyder's dark operatic take on, I think of it as the Man of Steel. I think of Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's his Superman trilogy. And everything that happens, it is the transition from Man of Steel to Superman. Because in Man of Steel, Superman doesn't exist, and Clark Kent, Kal-El, is finding out who and what he is. And by the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League, I know we don't get to see part 2 of that, but I feel that the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League, Superman is fully formed. And what we need to see now is a new Superman film with Henry Cavill, and what Zack Snyder tees up, we will see the realization of. And as I said, after seeing that tweet that James Gunn said starting a new job today, and it's a comic book panel of Clark Kent at the Daily Planet typing a story, it would shock me if we don't have an announcement that James Gunn's directing a Superman movie in the next 2 months by Christmas. And I think that's absolutely going to happen. Jaimin D goes on to say, have you ever seen Secrets of the Incas? I have not, with Charlton Heston. Was the character of Indiana Jones based off his Harry Steele? Sorry if everyone is already aware of this, as I saw it recently and I realized, I've never seen Secret of the Incas. I've heard that. I wouldn't say no to it, because, obviously Philip Kaufman and George Lucas, when they came up with the idea, that was kind of what, they were basing it off of past stuff that had happened, but I'm sure it was definitely part of the inspiration for it. I don't know about that. I don't know if that's correct, but it definitely could be. Sujis says, let's not butcher Denis Villeneuve's name anymore. It's pronounced Denis Villeneuve. Villeneuve. Or you'll say Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve. If you're speaking of French, it's Villeneuve. Villeneuve. Neve rhymes with nerve. So it's, so you're saying Neve is nerve, so it's Villeneuve? Rhymes with, so it's Denis Villeneuve? Is it? That's interesting. I didn't know that. I thought it was Villeneuve. So Denis Villeneuve. Is it? I don't know if that's... Okay, I will trust you, Sujith, because you're from a foreign country, and every foreign country is smarter than we are. So, and I believe that. So that's interesting. I've never heard it. I've never heard that. So I bet you're not wrong. In Somatic 101 says, "Here's your money for the rant." Shout out to the chat. Well, yeah, I guess if life really gets bad, I can stay on a street corner and we'll rant for super chats. Steven Anderson in the chat says it's pronounced nerd. Love it. Romy Forever sends in a super chat and says R2D2 rules. Yes, of course, unless you're in a movie called Force Awakens, in which case you're not. Dan Candy says, I was actually going to address this, but since you brought it up, I'm going to talk about that too. The Enterprise incident, Romulans now using Klingon design. My headcanon tells me Klingons received the Bird of Prey designs in the tech swap. Okay, so Dan has actually done something that Star Trek fans do, and I love this. Dan has come up with a reason why something that bothered me canonically could actually have happened. He has said, now this is really interesting. So for those of you who don't know, we never saw a Klingon. This is hard to understand now because there's two versions of the original Star Trek that are now available to watch. One is the original version, but in the late aughts, when they put Star Trek out, the original series on Blu-ray, they decided to redo the visual effects digitally. Why did they decide to do this? Well, because the digital, the visual effects, the space effects in Star Trek were done on, like they used to be done, on optical printers, which means each layer, the planet was a layer, the Enterprise was a layer, and they would take these and they would put them all together, different film elements, and put them together one on top of one another, and then shoot them again on an optical printer. The problem was it made everything dirty, and the resolution, every time they did that, it was less sharp. So when you looked at the beautiful negative of the original live action footage coupled with the very dirty effects work, just because of how it was made, it was very obtrusive. So the decision was made that they needed to make the visual effects live up to the live action footage. So they digitally recreated effects and redesigned effects. And actually they tried to, when they could, in episodes like Court Martial, they accentuated our understanding of what was going on in the episode through the new effects work. And I thought it was a pretty mixed bag because they didn't have a lot of money to do it, but I understand why they did it. But anyway, in the original Enterprise incident, it's a third season episode of the original series. In the original series, they did not have a Klingon battlecruiser model until the third season. So they wanted to maximize its usage. And so I believe the first time we saw, sometimes these details get fuzzy, but I believe the first time that we saw the Klingon battlecruiser was in the episode Elaine of Troyes. The third season episode Elaine of Troyes, I think. But then in the Enterprise incident, they really made use of it because the Enterprise is surrounded by Klingon battlecruisers. And because the production wanted to show off this new model, they built it and they wanted to show it off. So they used the Klingon battlecruiser model, which is awesome. And the Enterprise is surrounded by Klingon battlecruisers. And how do they explain this? It's a Klingon ship being used by the Romulans in the Enterprise incident, even armed with cloaking devices. And in the episode, Spock just says one line of dialogue, the Romulans are now using Klingon designs, which, by the way, in the real world, makes perfect sense. There's new starship technology. The Romulans have bought this technology, and they're using it because there was a truce between them. So the idea was that he says that the reason that the Klingons are using a bird of prey is because they got that technology in some kind of a swap deal. And I would say, okay, I'll buy that. And I guess my problem is, and that's how I've justified it to myself over the years. But at the time I didn't, because it was a mistake. It was an actual production mistake. They just didn't change it. So that's why it always bothered me, having read the original storyline with the Romulans. But yes, in Star Trek, the Star Trek universe, it was justified in canon as being part of whatever technology swap that they had. The problem was then later on, it made it seem like the Klingons were the ones, and that because they reused that model, the very same ship, there was a different class, there was the Cavort class. It was a big mess. But yes, Dan, you are correct about that. Hartford just sends in a 1999 super chat. Well, thank you. I thank you very much. The Hartford. I always think of like Mutual of Omaha. Do anybody remember that? The Hartford. But thank you. I very much appreciate that. That's very nice of you. Thank you for supporting the channel like that. Alex Detman coming back with Alex. Alex, you're such a sweet guy with a $50 super chat. You moderate this channel, sir. Thank you so much for that. You're very nice. Alex says, I just got off work. Sorry I'm late to the epic rants of my fiery friend, but it was payday. And to the PGS and you, R&B, I love this community. P.S. Sorry about the package. Send it today, my man. Oh, well, don't worry about it. I will open it. Elon Abdi says, I'm just here to show support. Well, Elon, thanks for the support. I appreciate that. And thanks for the heart and the film strip. That's very nice of you. Sue just says, oh, I'm sorry. So it's Denis Villeneuve. It is Neuve, but without Neuve, but without the R. Yes, so that's good. That's what I was saying. Denis Villeneuve. That's right. Sort of right. At least I try. I do. I try. You know what I wanted to do? You know, this has been a long chat. Normally on this show I read letters, and if you want to send a letter to me, you can right there at postgeeksingularity.com. I've got a few letters, and I would like to read letters because I haven't read letters in a while. And let's see. Here's a good one. This refers, David Miller, our friend David Miller wrote this, and a couple of days ago, I was talking about how sometimes it's difficult to be a pundit in the YouTube space and think about using people's pronouns. I have no problem using people's pronouns. However people identify and want to be called, I have no problem doing that. But as I explained, it sometimes becomes difficult because like Emma Darcy, who plays Rhaenyra Targaryen on House of the Dragon, identifies as non-binary in real life. And when I'm speaking about them, I'm a huge fan of them. And yet, when they're playing a female character, I do think of her, meaning Rhaenyra Targaryen, as it's kind of one and the same. So when you're discussing House of the Dragon, it can get confusing. And I don't want to, don't want to offend anyone. And we had been called to task. Someone wrote in and said, if you can't be bothered to use people's proper pronouns, I mean, how hard can it be? Well, when you're talking live on TV, it can be, or TV on the internet, it can be hard because the way you think of people, you're thinking about their character and you're not thinking about, it's difficult. We will learn. It is a process. And I think that it's important to try. But now David Miller has written in this letter to talk about this. He, she, and Ezra. Hey, Rob, salutations. I've noticed that you've been very deferential toward Ezra Miller's choice of pronouns. I think that's quite admirable of you and polite as well. I, too, would respect someone's choice of pronouns if I had actually had occasion where I dealt with someone who requests a certain identifier. But the situation with Miller is very singular, causing thoughts in me that I'd like to share with you and the Post-Geek Singularity. I haven't come to a set opinion yet, but here's what I've been thinking about Miller's specific situation. First, Rob, would you say Ezra Miller is operating under sound mind and body, specifically mind? Based on his actions and your comments on same, I'd say you think he is not of sound mind. That said, should we be beholding to a choice of gender by someone who may or may not be fit to make that decision? This decision seems contemporaneous with his erratic behavior. Add to that fact that as an actor and self-promoter, this non-binary identity could just be a device to garner attention, because in his vocation, attention equals money. As I said, I haven't formed an opinion. I'm just weighing in. To extend the logic of the argument a little further, there are more and more minors coming out as non-binary or opposite of the gender they were born with biologically. These kids' feelings should be respected. But tell me this. Do we allow minors to vote, to take out a car loan, to get married, to adopt a child, to own a gun? No, probably because we feel their minds haven't matured enough to make these decisions. I would like to think that gender reassignment is a bigger choice than taking out a bank loan, and that those choices should be between the child and their parent. It should be the job of a parent to protect the child and to do what's best for them, whatever that best is. Now, I've read that there were certain nations of indigenous peoples that had people who were non-binary, and those nations were cool with it. Yes, they probably couldn't perform any kind of surgeries or prescribe hormonal drugs, but they did sound pretty chill on this topic. Again, I don't have answers. I'm just sharing the internal debate that I'm having in my mind. Thanks for listening, David Miller. I think that's a great letter. Look, I look at it this way. I think that all of these questions are important as we are now more aware of these things than we've ever have been. And I have read that there were certain indigenous cultures that understood that people were either non-binary or even trans, and they were okay with it because that's the way they were created. And I think that's probably a good thing. I mean, look, all of this is an understanding. It is all a process of learning about ourselves and learning about each other. And my feeling is this. You know, as I've said, I've had friends that were LGBTQ since I could identify somebody as a friend when I was 13. And it was never a problem for me. I just want people to be able to be who they are and be treated with respect. And what I wish more people were more aware of, though, or more tolerant of, is that it's a process. And I think it is difficult. You know, I have no problem calling anybody whatever they want to be called, but it's a strange thing because, you know, now everybody gets so touchy about how you deal with things. Like, I have a huge collection of movies, and I really appreciate Elliot Page as an actor. But Elliot Page is different than Elliot Page was 10 years ago. And I own movies that Elliot Page appeared in and that he appeared in. But he didn't exist at the time he appeared in those movies. He was different. And how do you, like, I find it difficult, like, I don't want to get in trouble, but if I'm speaking about Juno or even Inception, and let's say I just watched Inception yesterday, and I'm talking about Inception, I would hope if I was speaking about the cast of Inception and I might have made a mistake or said something that isn't true today, that people would understand that I understand why you were saying those kinds of things, because back then, the person that Elliot Page did not exist when he made Inception. And it's hard. I mean, it's something, and I don't even know what the etiquette is, the proper etiquette. Because how do you watch a movie, if somebody is transitioned, how do you watch a movie from 10 years ago and talk about it when that person was not who they are today? Do you talk about them how they are today, but they weren't that way back in the movie they were in? So how do you discuss the movie? I mean, as a pundit, as an online pundit. And I think this is all evolutionary behavior. We're evolving into a better place. We're respecting people and understanding people more than we ever have, and we should be doing that. I just wish people weren't, I wish people weren't so quick to go after those people that make these kinds of mistakes or aren't in that place yet where they are being the kind of respectful people they should be. And it's tough. It's hard. I think, it's something it's ongoing. This one comes from Brandon C. Brandon C says, "Hey Rob, I really enjoyed Jedi Tales. It's a show that has done what I want. Andor is a show that is the best written show on Disney+. The Star Wars shows have been something I really look forward to. I realize you are more disappointed in Star Wars than I am, but you give every show a chance." I do. And by the way, I like both Tales of the Jedi, and I love Andor. I totally respect people who watch these shows and explain the weakness of writing, and it's fair. I'm 48 years old, and I only dislike 2 Star Wars projects, The Last Jedi and the Star Wars Christmas Special. So I think you and I want the same thing. We want great Star Wars. Is there any chance Star Wars will do what Marvel has done and adapt the books, like Old Republic or the Thrawn books, maybe Darth Bane? I wish Kathleen Kennedy had a story person, help, and a plan. Finally, George had a plan. You may not like the prequels, but at least there was a plan. Thanks for all you do, Brandon C. Brandon, well, I think you're right. I mean, look, the reason that I like Andor so much is because in my mind, it's elevated Star Wars storytelling to the place that it always existed in my imagination anyway. You know? But Andor is just a terrific show. If you took the Star Wars out of it and say you set that exact same show in, I don't know, Germany or France of 1934, it could still work. But I love what they're doing with the Star Wars universe, and they're really delving into not just the beginnings of a rebellion, but why is an empire bad? How does an empire begin to oppress its people? Why rebel at all? And it's a scary fucking place, and I think that it's what Star Wars needed, and I really think that's important. This letter comes from Travis. Hi, Rob. First, I don't want you to print or discuss this letter. Oh, then I won't. All right, Travis, I won't discuss this letter. But thanks for writing in. I'll read it myself and maybe get back to you. This one is Kid Eternity. That's from Dave. I just read his letter. I'll save that. James Bond, lesser Roger Moore, writes in. Rob, I feel that based on recent events, the reports of the end of the Cold War are greatly exaggerated. I don't blame the West for trying to close the book on the Cold War, but it seems somebody forgot to tell Russia and China. I feel like James Bond might still have a place in this world. Thoughts? Well, I got to tell you, I think you're absolutely right. And it's too bad that we're where we are at. But yeah, I think it's definitely good for 007. I mean, world events between the Chinese and between what's going on with Russia. I mean, it's at the end of the day, we live in a strange time because we're seeing what's going on with Russia and China is the last sort of bastion of the 20th century. That's by the end of the 21st century, the world, I'm not going to be here, but the world's going to look, I think, very different. Hopefully we will get through it all. I think what's happened in Ukraine is a graphic example of why this kind of aggression and this kind of warfare is futile, and what it's cost the people of Russia. How, again, you read more and more the war crimes and the horrible dehumanization of what's gone on. It's the same old story that has been going on with warfare for thousands of years. There's just really no place in it in our modern age, and hopefully we'll see that this kind of thing, this kind of saber rattling, the destruction of human beings is really just needlessly pointless. And I think we're better than that. And hopefully we're seeing I'd like to believe the end of it all, because at the end of the day, what exactly are you fighting for? What exactly do you want? You want these authoritarian regimes to tell regular people what to do? And what are they going to do? Limit people on TikTok? I mean, you've already got... It's so funny to me that the Chinese have created TikTok, and every intelligence agency in the world knows that they're using it to gather information on people. And yet at the end of the day, no one cares. Whatever. But hopefully, maybe if we get better Bond movies out of this, hey, you're not wrong. You are not wrong. This one comes from Nathan K. His Girl Friday. Hello, Rob. I wanted to write a letter and talk about an older film I recently watched for the first time, directed by Howard Hawks, called His Girl Friday. Okay, these are the best letters in the world, because first of all, Howard Hawks is a great director, and His Girl Friday is a great movie. I decided to watch this film because Steven Spielberg referenced this film as an example of a man and a woman exchanging fast-paced dialogue. The movie has been sitting in my watch list for years, but the other day I finally decided to sit down and watch it. I've got to say, Rob, I have never seen a movie like this. The dialogue exchange and verbal sparring in this movie makes everything I've seen before look like Little League Baseball. Not only is the on-screen banter between Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell great, but the snappiness really extends to the whole cast, with several scenes where multiple characters are juggling multiple phone conversations at once. It's very impressive and super entertaining. I have to know, Rob, have you seen this film? Is this one of the many movies in your physical media collection? It is. And do you have any recommendations for movies like this that are full of fast, smart dialogue and verbal sparring between the actors on screen? Yours truly, Nathan K. His Girl Friday is a great movie, and Howard Hawks is a great director. Look, there's a lot of movies like this, but I would say here's the thing. It's a very different kind of a movie. But if you want to see a movie that has incredible dialogue, it's a different kind of a movie, though. A movie called The Sweet Smell of Success that stars Tony Curtis and Burt Lancaster. You're a cookie full of arsenic. There's so much great dialogue. But even if you go back and watch the great noir films like Double Indemnity, and of course my beloved Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve. I mean, they're just different kinds. His Girl Friday is a very different kind of a movie. But I'm telling you, go back and watch the movies of the 40s and the 50s, the best of them, the best noir movies, the best comedies. They have a command of language that we don't have anymore. It's really great stuff. I'm glad you really watched it. You watched His Girl Friday, because what a great film. And Nathan K., you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. Now, let me just okay, I'm caught up on Super Chats, I believe, and I think I'm caught up on tips as well. Okay, good. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle souls, kind beings, however you identify across the 28 known galaxies, I'm going to bring this rant of a Robservations to an end. Wow, I kind of popped off. I didn't expect it to be like this, but I'm going to end it anyway. I want to thank everybody for being here. First of all, I want to thank everybody who generously supports the channel via Super Chats and tips. You guys are very sweet. I love this audience. If you're members of the channel, remember on Saturday we are having a member chat. How those work is I'm with you guys sometimes it's 3 and 4 hours, and we just chat. And how it works, you come in, if you're a member of the channel, you can come into the chat, and people raise their hands, and we basically give everybody, whoever wants to speak, 10 minutes to say whatever the hell you want. And then I'll respond if you have questions for me, other people. It's just a fun time. It's just to hang out, bring a glass of wine or whatever, or a bottle of wine, and chat. Ron C. has been a member of the channel for 22 months. Good to have you. And I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson, and I want to thank Alex, and I want to thank Roberto Suarez, but Tom for being a goof person and being a great moderator and being up late. Tom, thank you. And everybody that supports the channel via Super Chats and tips. Tomorrow is Friday. That means I'm back with Lael Rockwell and the great and we have our Midnight Musings show. I don't know if I'm going to keep trying to do Robservations during the week. I think they're fun. I'm sorry. A lot of people, I let the channel kind of slide working under John. I love working with the John Campea channel. I think it's been a lot of fun. So much fun. And the audience, love you guys. The audience is getting bigger, and it's just fun. And we are going to bring back Whining About Movies. That show is where, for those of you who are new, my girlfriend Elizabeth, she and I watch a movie, and then we just talk about it and drink a bottle of wine together. Whining About Movies. We did like 150 episodes. We're going to bring it back probably on Sunday, hopefully. And if not, I keep saying that, but we really want to do it. And that movie will be Everything Everywhere All at Once. That will be the first of our Whining About movies. So look for that. And other than that, I will say this to all of you. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And hopefully that story is in canon. Doesn't break canon. And on that note, I say to all of you, have a better day or a better night, wherever you are. And thanks for being here.